Oh boy. I don't even know what's going on here.
I love that drawing.
I do too. I do too. I'd leave it up all night if we could. Welcome
Let's
everybody.
go ahead.
Horror Rumble time again. Kory,
Jess.
it's me. And it's Halloween season, and since we did the Halloween movies last year, we aren't doing that again. So Kory thought Universal Monsters would be a good one for the month, and I agree.
Yes.
You lovely banter tonight, Kory. Lovely banter.
I know. I'll give me a few minutes. It's a Friday night. We usually do this shit on Sundays.
We do, but the next month or two, I've got things going on Sundays. It just isn't working out. But we're here. We're here, and we're usually later in the month too.
Yeah. Everything's all fucked up this month.
It's October. It's the holiday season. Things are happening. Scarefest is coming up. Less than 2 weeks. You're gonna see a lot of people from the community doing shows from there, having videos from there at least, some sort of specials. If you're going down there, say hi to anybody of the crew you see. Shut up, Dan Shine. Shout out, Dan Shine. Hellraiser, like I said, I have respect for Pinhead and its movies, but it's not my bag. Hellraiser sucks. It was boring to me, and I've just never been able to put myself in there and watch them.
You're crazy.
Well, eventually I may have to if we ever get to that franchise. I know you were going to pull that card someday, so we'll see how that goes. You'll have to give me ample time, though.
Oh,
There's
I will.
Bad ones.
I will. Yes, there are some bad ones, and they might take you a couple of days to get through one, but
yeah, it might take me a couple of months. Anyway, we're going to pull on some fabulous people we got here. I know we've got some regulars returning, and one of those regulars hasn't been on yet this season. They were on a few times last season, but we'll get to that. Say quick highs to the chat before we pulled up Shiny. We got Dr. CZ's Death, Mr. Chris.
hello.
And we got the other Chris from Slasher Home Video. Whoop whoop. Big T. I think. Big Crack Rock. We got the bigs. The Chris's and the bigs.
Awesome.
Yeah, good to see you all. And Blu-rays. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Jessica.
Hello, Jessica.
Anyway, we just going in the order that came in.
Sure.
All right. Well, our first guest tonight needs no introduction because he has his own introductions. Orc.
What's up, faggots? Happy Halloween season.
Happy Halloween season, brother. Good to see you. Glad to have you back. I feel like it's been a couple episodes.
You were drinking Mountain Dew earlier. What the hell?
Well, what do you want? Hang on. Do this over again.
All right, and the man who needs no introduction because he has his own, Orc. Was my mic on?
Yes, it's on. All right, my stomach might explode, but here we go.
Well, don't do it because your stomach.
There we go. A lot of carbonation. Real talk.
Real talk. Gosh, we're trying to keep you alive, brother.
Real talk.
Kill you. Real talk. This is dangerous.
Or
this is like
if
a
your
tornado.
stomach explodes, I'm gonna feel like shit now.
Oh God, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. Okay, we'll pace those out tonight.
Yes, that poor Orc. We knew him well, Chris. All right, all right.
Are you ready?
I think so.
And
Oh,
yeah,
wait.
productions,
Go
and
ahead.
then we'll dive into the movies.
Cheers. I got a butterscotch malt going on, by the way.
Oh,
Nice.
you fucker.
For the first time in our second season of Horror Rumble, but she was a regular on the first season. Hello, Miss Sam.
Oh my god, that was amazing. I love that drawing.
That's
That
usually
is
not
so
the reaction
cute.
I get with the drawings, so thank you.
I love it. Oh my god. See, I need that on all the merchandise. I would rep that at all the horror cons. Absolutely. You just get action figures of all of us. It'd be so cool.
That would be awesome. I've always wanted an
I
action
don't
figure.
know if we can afford action figures. We can do like paper cutouts on popsicle sticks.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Nothing too fancy. You know, we're very humble and modest people here, right?
Yeah,
Sure,
I think
sure.
so.
Jonathan Bombastic.
Oh, fuck off, Jonathan. You fucker.
Now the
You
real
got me
question.
already.
Oh my god.
The
That was
question
quicker than I thought.
the question I've got is why is Chris and Jonathan still in the chat and not on here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe they don't know the films as well.
I call horse shit.
I literally just watched Dracula today. I don't really think that's an excuse.
Oh, nice, Orc.
That is
Ooh.
nice.
And do you own it, or do you watch it on Peacock? I noticed Peacock has a large collection of the franchises.
Oh yeah,
Universal
Comcast
Classics.
Universal. Yeah, good call.
Yes.
That was at you, Sam.
No, that was not me farting.
Aw.
That was somebody else.
It wasn't me.
Oh,
Fuck you,
Jess.
too, Dan Shine.
Shine, you're on a roll today. That's all I'm gonna say. And for
We
now,
still got one more.
last but not least, are you ready?
Yeah.
He loves this. He loves this.
Why does he look like that boy?
I feel like they just added hair to my drawing to make you, Sam. I feel
in
like
all
they
reality,
plagiarized themselves.
They are they were modified from each other.
Oh my gosh, that's so close to being a really
And
cute
you
little
know what?
animation.
If you could make a GIF of that, just like what you're doing now, just slightly faster, put some digital underground in there, and we could be Tupac.
That's gangster as fuck. I love it.
So let's start this off right to prove that I am not a hypocrite. A great Lucio Fulci film. It's a slipcase, so let's start it off.
Oh,
Rip the
Jesus.
slip.
It's a Friday night.
I love it.
This man has no boundaries.
I love Touch of Death, by the way. It's like the last classic Fulci film, really. But
You don't need that slip cover.
if you haven't
for
seen
though.
it, definitely check it out. I mean, Cat in the Brain is a greatest hits collection. But
You want to lift your box up again, Orc?
Here you go.
it's not
Well,
the
I
first
have
time he's
seen
lifted
other
his box
movies.
today.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Bam. This was the
Blu-ray
cheap one
even.
way back in the day. About
So
a
that's
decade
that's
ago.
the one with the wrong Phantom on it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they fixed that, but yeah.
The one, and then the one to own was on DVD, and I don't know if they put it out on Blu-ray. It's the one that has every single Universal monster movie, and that one was a little bit pricey, so I never picked it up.
We'll get to that, but it's better, but it does not include every one of them with the actual monster entries.
And that's why we have Lorne on the show, and I'm just here to watch. There you go.
Well, I mean, Sam, I could be wrong about you, but I figured I know at least with the rest of us, Lorne is going to be the one with something to really add about these movies. I'd say if anybody's an expert here on these films, it's him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lauren knows all the stuff about Universal monsters, and you know, I enjoyed Invisible Man. I'm definitely an Invisible Man stan. Invisible stan. I don't know. But you know, it's like it's one of these things where, you know, I want to piece together the missing knowledge, you know. And I know I just only saw Dracula. I'm gonna knock out Frankenstein and Bride of this weekend, hopefully.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, but I you know, it's fun to get in the mood.
It is. and I think it's perfect for this season. And like you were saying, he's to fill in the pieces for, I think, most people out there. You know, we all are familiar with these characters, but not necessarily every film in their franchise. So, kind of.
So for the record, I mean, depending whether you count the Spanish version of Dracula as a completely different film or not, there's either 42 or 43 films in the entire Universal Monster catalog. We're not going to cover all of them tonight, obviously, but it's worth mentioning that it's a lot wider, and the dominance of Universal in the horror field. It was seriously a 19-year run where they just dominated, and then there's a few outliers like Creature from the Black Lagoon and This Island Earth, which shouldn't be completely out of the conversation, but there's a lot there. I mean, it's well worth investigating beyond the titles that everyone knows and can name check, like Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman. So,
Well, hopefully throw out there. I know there is a list. Creature we are covering, but movies like that really didn't have the franchises, like The Raven, The Black Cat, and you had a couple in mind, Lauren, that week.
oh yeah, well, the Brute Man series with the Rondo Hatton films, The Creeper. So one of the things is, like, some people will choose to disclude something like Tower of London because there's not a monster in it, although it has one of Karloff's great roles in the genre. It's kind of a historical drama with lots of darkness and lots of edginess and gothicness. But so it's kind of hard to, some people will include or disclude. I think that David Scal's list is probably the one to go with, because he tends to conclude everything that would interest people that find themselves interested in the Universal Monsters. And I think that's worthwhile, because I think if you love this stuff, you're going to find yourself watching a lot more than just the 42 or 43 canonical films anyway. This stuff that just had Lugosi or Karloff in them that weren't necessarily from Universal. There's films from Universal that were not in the genre proper, but have a star like Lionel Atwill in them. That should draw your interest. It's all worthwhile. Go back and check it out. And I hope we get to this, but many of these films really haven't aged the way that you would think, considering that a lot of them are coming up on 90 years old. And yet some of them have aged a lot better than films from the 50s or 60s. So there's something there to be said.
Well, in our first film, we're going to, at least bring up, like I said, if we went through every one of these movies, it'd take us probably a full year of Horror Rumble just to do the Universal classic horror series. So we're going to stick to the most known characters usually, but the first one, should we start it off?
Yeah.
Is almost 100 years old, not quite. But 1925 is The Phantom of the Opera. And I'm gonna list all the Phantoms under this category. There was also 1943, Claude Rains. Yeah. Because the 25 one was Lon Chaney. Chaney Sr. Now known as Senior.
What is that?
So, the Phantom of the Opera movies.
Anybody else see that?
See what?
See what?
Never mind. I'm pretty tired.
Okay.
I was at 3:30, so it's probably just fun.
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of the classic era. I've always stated that I don't love anything from the classic era as much as I probably should. Nosferatu is as close as I come to loving anything in the genre from the silent era. But I will say that Chaney's Phantom is my preferred version of the story. I don't think there's been any that have been as iconic or as kind of true to the Gaston Leroux novel. Obviously, the grasshopper choice, which is kind of like the real climax of the novel, is not in any version. So there's that. But I love the performance from Chaney as Eric. I think it's appropriately both tragic and completely malevolent. I love it. I think the unmasking scene is still one of horror's great iconic scenes. Like every version of the Phantom, though, It's slow. There's not a version of this story, even the Robert Englund version, somehow is too slow for its own good. Maybe it's just built into the material. Although the novel's a quick read. If you pick up the LaRue novel, you'll burn through that. It reads like a thriller because it was. And either the big translations of it are great, by the way. So.
Well, the silent one, surprisingly, is the one I know the most and am fond of. I've seen the Claude Rains one, but it's really one of the few silent films, the Lon Chaney one, that I enjoy, with Nosferatu and maybe Metropolis.
Cabinet of Calgary is in there somewhere too, right? And maybe the original version of Diabolique.
Honestly, don't know if I've seen that.
Then Awakening of the Light, the Yugoslavian, one of the first horror films, feature-length horror films anywhere, came out of Yugoslavia. It's called Awakening of the Light. I've come to like that quite a lot. Big Crack Rock Stock in the Phantom Carriage is better than an opera. Yeah, it's also like what 1/60th of its runtime.
Well, that keeps a faster pace then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you have like the Devil's Castle, you have Phantom Carriage, all those early shorts that were made for the Nickelodeons in the genre.
Blu-ray says Sam is so pretty, and Daniel Shine says Orc is pretty as well. Blu-rays.
That's very true. Orc is very pretty.
I have trouble telling them apart sometimes.
I do too. Sometimes I wake up and I look in the mirror, I'm not sure who it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you imagine how confusing this is for Chris? Well, tell Chris, not Flasher.
Dr. CZ.
I'm assuming it's just like, a bonanza of greatness for him.
What?
He gets to have,
say.
The fantasy that,
I'm sexy and I know it.
You got support with Rip the Slip in the chat. Big T and Jessica. Oh, hello, Grave Abyss.
I'm not sure who's Asher slapping Orc, but
wish you could be here too, Jake. Sorry you missed this one. You'll be back though.
I'm actually proud of Jake. From my understanding, he actually sat down and started watching these, preparing to do the show, and then due to the date that we chose, he was unable to do it. So.
Aww.
And Mikey, your YouTube favorite American truck driver.
What's up, Brian? You're my homie.
And Brian Trash, thank you.
Hello
Real
to
talk.
all.
So anyway, anyone else on the Phantom series franchise?
Oh, I remember watching the original one with Lon Chaney Sr. To be honest with you, I don't get too into silent movies either, but this one actually held my attention. So that, to me, that speaks volumes. So I think I've probably watched maybe three silent movies in my entire life. This is one of them. What's the one with Conrad Veidt?
The Man Who Smiles?
Yes.
Man Who Laughs, sorry. Man Who Laughs.
That. And then Mechanics Man. Old Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Mm-hmm.
But those are about the only three silent movies I've ever watched, and the fact that this held my attention says a lot for it. So, at least for me.
Well, I have it on a 50 horror movie pack, the silent one.
I'm sure it looks great. I'm sure it looks amazing on that set.
It works, yeah. I'm sure it's not the sharpest of images.
Does yours have the Hunchback on there too?
Yep.
Okay.
So does yours have the tinted sequences? That's the real question.
Oh, it's been a while, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the Mask of Red Death sequence is tinted in was originally tinted for release. So
wonder if that is.
It's pretty great.
There's a chance it's not. I mean, these were probably it's all public domain movies, so it was Bill Creek whoever threw that box together.
Probably hasn't been. But you know, that's not a neat deal breaker by any means. I think we should talk a little bit about the Rains film, because it's going to get shade because it just stands in the shadow. It does. The real only sin of that movie is there's way too much opera. And then there's a weird fetishism of the time. Like, for some reason, there was a big movement to elevate Franz Liszt to one of the great masters at that time. So Franz Liszt is a character in the movie, which is like, you know, that's pulled out of their ass. That's not in the novel. So they make this huge deal. And of course, it's not really Liszt. Liszt was long dead. But there was this big push because there was some star power behind this composer being given screen time. And there's a lot of ways that movie just is of its time. Whereas I feel like the Chaney version just wants to tell the story that was in the novel as best it can. But the Rains version isn't bad. It's just much slower, and there's a lot of opera.
That's why, yeah, I mean, we got to give it respect, but somehow I think that's why the silent film trumps it. It is much slower. It's not as memorable. And that again is still surprising to me.
When Hammer visited it to do their spin on it, which their film is with Herbert Lom, is kind of one of the most uneven things Hammer ever did. But it's funny because they based it clearly on the Rains movie, not on the original silent film, and that's always been a weird choice to me. I don't know if in Britain, the Rains film was eclipsed the original. I don't know, but they definitely based it on that, and that to me always was a kind of missed opportunity.
Well, I mean, was the Rains film in color?
It was.
Yeah. So you got a colorized version. It's sound. It's not even 20 years after the silent one, so I can see where for a while that one might have overshadowed the Lon Chaney one. But I could be wrong too.
I feel like in America that never happened, though. I feel like the Chaney film endured really well in America.
It just lasted. Yeah, I mean, what is it? 98 years now. Did I do my?
Well, how many? I mean, the average person. I'm not talking about film buffs, but the average person. You say name as many silent films as you can. Are they coming up with 10? Are they coming up with 5?
I'm going to be lucky to come up with 5.
But I guarantee if they come up with 5, Phantom of the Opera's on that list.
That's true.
And we always talk about the horror genre not getting the respect it deserves because, like, if you think about it, in every era, the horror films of that era, the truly groundbreaking ones, are a big part of film history, period. And yet it still doesn't always get the respect. But it's a good example. When you talk about the silent era, I bet if you got someone who could name 10, at least half of them would be horror films.
True to that. And the other half would be Charlie Chaplin films or something.
Correct. Definitely. Buster Keaton, probably.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, Buster Keaton, yes.
I would like to point out, even though I'm sure it's common knowledge, especially in this group, that Lon Chaney Sr. was the Shohei Ohtani of his day because of the fact that he not only acted, but he did his own makeup. So.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Forgot about that.
And his son obviously followed in his footsteps, right?
I don't think
Lon
his son
Chaney
did his
do
own
makeup
makeup.
too?
I'm not sure his son even acted, to be honest with you. But we'll get there.
We'll get there. Well, any last thoughts on the Phantom series before we move on? No?
I think we covered it.
Well, the next one we're going to cover, and I believe this is Sam's favorite of this batch of horror, The Invisible Man.
Fuck yeah.
And I'm not doing these necessarily in the year they're released. That's going to be obvious as we go along.
Like Claude Rains back to back almost.
But we get
That's true. I didn't even do that on purpose.
We get Uno O'Connor like back to back, hopefully. So
I just
I'm
want
going
to
by
point out
monsters,
real
though.
quick. This is partially to do with this movie, but how underrated is Claude Rains as an actor?
Very.
I mean, the guy was in Casablanca, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman. There's tons of huge movies that he was a big part of.
I mean, I know his name well as far as being an actor in film, but maybe that's just I'm somewhat of a film buff. I say somewhat, hanging out with you guys.
Oh, you're fine, believe me. So yeah, James Whale, following up on obviously a career-defining film, although he defined his career again after this. It's a staggering work of special effects. If you don't like anything else about Invisible Man, you have to be blown away by the fact that those special effects of the Invisible Man hold up against anything today. Period.
Mm-hmm.
They're still mesmerizing, and with what they had to work with at the time. I mean, when people talk about smoke and mirrors, that's literally what they were working with here. There's a lot of invisible string. There's a lot of film being played backwards. It's all this tapestry to create these effects that had to be done in camera mostly, because there just wasn't anything else. I would say like Hollow Man.
Even to this day.
Yeah, I'd say Hollow Man. Like people look at that and say that hasn't aged particularly well in special effects. I'm sure that James Wan Invisible Man in a few years, people are going to be like criticizing its digital effects.
Oh yeah.
But the Whale film just still looks spot on.
Yeah.
And
that's
and
actually.
part of,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Finish.
No, I mean that's a thought that I had when I was watching Dracula, which I'm sure we'll probably get to that. But that movie, it's still like, oh, you could just watch this today. It's better than pretty much every other Dracula movie we have.
Yeah.
Effects wise, so. I mean, except for maybe the Bat on the String.
Well, I love the Bat on the String, though.
I do too. I'm just saying, if we're going to be, I'm just
we
being.
need to name the Bat on the String before the end of the stream.
Name the Bat on the String?
Yeah, definitely. He needs a name.
George.
I think Batty's already copyrighted.
Yeah,
so
The one that got away from Ozzy.
Batley. And from Eureka's Castle.
I think
yes.
Orc's onto something. We should call it Ozzy.
Ozzy.
Ooh, that makes sense.
And forgive me, I meant to, because we can't go through each one of these films, like I said, I meant to read off all of them in the Invisible Man series at the beginning. So we had The Invisible Man, the original, 1933. The Invisible Man Returns, 1940.
Where you get a great Vincent Price performance.
Oh, yes. This is one I've watched recently, and I'll kind of get to that. The Invisible Woman.
It's a comedy, but it's part of the series.
My favorite type.
Well,
yeah. Okay.
The Invisible Agent, 1942.
Which is not exactly the movie that it promises to be.
Yeah. And finally, I think the last one, The Invisible Man's Revenge.
Which, so Evelyn Ankers is, of course, in Captive Wild Woman, a far superior later Universal Monster movie. But
Oop.
Oh, yeah.
Are we including that?
They include.
I think you have
the Abbott and
to.
Costello movies are considered part of each one of these franchises. Sadly,
My
dad hates them when they come on. We watch Svengoolie, and he hates it when it comes on. If it's an Abbott and Costello meet, whatever.
I like Meets Frankenstein, but the rest of it I think is. I think they get pretty dire, to be honest.
They're pretty bad. But the going back to the original Invisible Man, yes, it's fantastic. Speaking of Svengoolie, most of these movies, if I've watched them recently, it's been on Svengoolie. And I think it was The Invisible Man Returns and possibly Revenge were the recent ones of this series that I've watched. And even the effects of these sequels, these cheesy, not necessarily connected sequels, they're still pretty fantastic for as long ago as they were and hold up.
I'm blanking here. Is it this series or is it the Creature series where Clint Eastwood makes an appearance?
It is the second Creature film.
Okay.
briefly as a scientist. It's
Isn't it uncredited?
I don't know. I'd have to check the credits. I mean, it's dead obvious it's him, but it's a very young Clint Eastwood for a minute and a half or something. In horribly miscast, by the way, but it doesn't matter. It's still fun. That the creature films, even the first, which is great, like a legitimate Stone Cold classic film, they're a lot more pulpy than the 30s and classics. They know what they are completely.
So, Lauren, I have a question for you because you tend to know more about the backstory, especially when it's related to the books. But have you read H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man?
I read it as a young man, but I have not revisited it. Wells is an easy read. It's not prohibitive, but I mean, Time Machine is kind of the place to go if you get your Wells kick.
Well, I was just curious mostly because, I figured maybe The Invisible Man might get the origins of that from the whole thing about Gaiji's ring, that story, and I think it's Plato. Where it's kind of like that moral test about if you were able to wear a ring and you were granted invisibility, what would you do with it?
Yeah, I think that there's I think you're onto something there. I also think it's just I think that you got to look at the world of the 1930s very soberly. We're between world wars, right? There's a lot of paranoia in the air. The idea of an invisible man and of what that causes, like, I think there's an association between not being seen and the idea of like social insanity. So today we look at that as the incels of the world, right? Everyone thinks they're all about to snap. They're all the Joker movie, right? Which is probably a gross oversimplification, but they're the current invisible men. But I think, especially as this series went on, it became explicitly kind of about world domination. And even in the first Invisible Man, he starts, by the end of it, he's talking about taking over the world somehow by being invisible. I don't know how, but he's talking about it. I think I think you're right. I think that probably is the literary precedent for Invisible Man, but I think there was a lot of the paranoia of the time woven in, probably unnecessarily in a lot of cases, because the story as it is kind of a closed door mystery of a weird sort of bent, because it's kind of like one location. I've always thought it, and this is going to get me in trouble with absolutely everyone in the community, but is there a film that's closer to John Carpenter's The Thing than The Invisible Man? Because the major difference is, rather than have a very visible monster, it's invisible. Mm-hmm. But as far as how it's constructed, it's a bunch of people in a secluded snowbound location, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
It's paranoia.
Yeah,
it's there. So I'd love to be. I mean, that's the thing. Is like John Carpenter will never cop to what his influences really were, but I think it's very likely this is one of them.
That's cool. I could see that, especially also with the paranoia going around, because for me, like, for part of it, the reason like the Gaiji's ring story doesn't really resonate with me comparing it to The Invisible Man is because The Invisible Man's having a great fucking time. It's not a moral quandary at all.
No.
He's like an agent of chaos. He's having a good time.
Yeah, and Reigns there is again another Joker reference, but which is interesting. But the Heath Ledger performance of the Joker is probably leaning into Claude Rains' performance in Invisible Man too, because it has that you can't stop me because you can't predict me. You can't see me. You can't anticipate me. I'm a force of nature at this point. So maybe that's the whole world domination, like megalomaniacal psychology that's thrown in there. But I think the movie resonates to this day. And can we just take a moment to say, like, how blessed were we as a people? And I mean that in a very non-religious way, to have had James Whale in the genre. Eventually would get blacklisted, couldn't work. Which is interesting that his political beliefs were a bigger problem than his sexuality, even in his time. But also, serve in the military and then get blacklisted. It's kind of insane. But
that is.
What an incredible director to have pulled off as many classic films in the genre. as he did. And Todd Browning definitely needs a lot of love for the same reasons. We're going to get to him in a moment, I suppose. Freaks isn't on this list, but I think that's his masterpiece.
Freaks is great. It's not on our list, but
no, it's not a Universal film. But I mean, the 30s. I always say the 30s were the best decade for horror, and it's because look at the films we're talking about. They don't have any they're not carbon copies of each other. We love Friday the 13th, but we have to be honest about where that comes from, right? It's Halloween, which is Psycho. I mean, that's not what was happening in the 30s. There was this era of pure creation and adaptation from literary sources into a fairly brand new medium. Because film wasn't new, but films that talked were.
Mm-hmm.
And that really the media was coming into its being as a true commercial art. And it's just this amazing period where this creativity just is like assaulting the viewer with just how pure it is and how beautiful it is. That's another thing. These movies are beautiful to look at. They're gorgeous.
Absolutely.
Have you seen a Transformers movie from Michael Bay? They're not gorgeous. Spoilers, a bunch of things that look like crumpled cans are going to attack each other and fire missiles
in there.
That's
too
it.
much going on in those to even
Right. And that's because modern cinema is afraid to be still. It doesn't trust itself enough to be interesting enough to hold your attention without something flashing on screen. And
which is sad because a lot of that can end up making me nauseous or turn me off to the film. I've gotten upset about movies because the director or whoever chose to use shaky cam for its realism, whatever they want to call it, and I hate it, especially in the theater. It really gets to me.
Well, you know what the last time I felt kind of the Universal Monster vibe was the original version of Let the Right One In. That's a film that embraces stillness. And it's not afraid to take its time. It wants you to embrace the characters. It wants you to feel conflicted about the characters. But it's the last time I really felt that. The remake's not a bad film, but it's not a still film. And that's why I will always prefer the original of that series. But that's in modern terms, I think it's the closest we got to a Universal type of monster movie. And Shape of Water should have been that movie, right? But it wasn't.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be, I think the next one we're talking about, sort of a remake of that, or at least a true homage. And I don't know.
It's not a bad film. It's not a bad film, but it's not that.
Before we move on, the remake of this was the most recent, whatever. It was absolute garbage.
I agree.
Like anything that was even somewhat interesting about that movie you saw in the trailer, and just kind of surface level here, and me being a guy, the chick that they got to play the lead in that movie was but ugly, which is something that I will argue with anybody about. Any of the love interests or the main female leads in these older movies are all drop dead gorgeous. I mean, every last one of them. I couldn't tell you their names, but
I think that was, the decision to put Elizabeth Moss in there. I mean, she is a very good actress, and I love her in Mad Men. I haven't watched Handmaid's Tale because I'm just like, I don't think that's for me right now, so I'll wait and hold off on it. But I really enjoyed her in Mad Men as Peggy. I think that they decided to cast her in this to make her more relatable and to really kind of drive home the fact that domestic violence can, really happen to anybody. So that was kind of what I took away from that. But I like her as an actress, even if she isn't, necessarily conventionally attractive. But what did you guys dislike about the movie per se? Because it is definitely very different from the Claude Rains version. And
you're talking about the remake, right?
Huh?
You're talking about the remake, right?
Not James Wan. The other half a Saw. Lee Winnell.
Yeah, the 2018 version, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I brought this up before, Lorne. When that came out, I was just starting to stream and with you, and you were like, "Oh, Jess, I can't wait till you see The Invisible Man. I'd like to get your take on it as a fellow film buff or whatever." Well, I hadn't watched it, but like a few months later, I brought it up to you again, saying, "Oh, I gotta watch that soon." I still haven't watched it. And you're like, "Yeah, that's a piece of shit." And I was like, "Well, why'd you ask me to watch it?"
Because at the time it was getting overwhelmingly positive response from the entire community, and I was trying to gauge whether that was just because like Lee Winnell has a lot of good he did a lot of a good reputation behind him. There's a lot of good films behind him.
Yeah, I agree.
Like including some great films, but I would say the action film he made. What is that thing called?
Lava
No, it's the one where he keeps being taken over by the chip in his brain and just beating the shit out of everyone. I can't remember at the moment, but that's a great film. So everyone
Upgrade?
was Upgrade.
Oh, that's right.
It's a great film. Everyone in the community was kind of like just blown away by it. And the film has massive plot holes, like not just little plot holes, like massive plot holes. And then it decides about halfway through it that it's going to abandon everything it's been doing up to that point just for big dumb action sequences with cool special effects. And we all know what happens to modern cool special effects 5 years down the line. Unless you're Jurassic Park, they look like shit. So, and even Jurassic Park has moments where you kind of go, I don't know. It just has a lot
very
more.
Few, and I mean that's it.
Yeah,
still
that's
compared to some of the CG today. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
why? We've talked about this on other
Oh, yeah.
streams before, Lorne.
Yeah, but so I was more probably just looking for your opinion when everyone else was screaming that it was great, and I was like one of the few guys going, "It looks great. It's a beautifully like crafted film, but man, it's dumb. It's really, really dumb. It has that specific type of dumb that only a Blumhouse film can achieve."
Well, what are the plot holes that you're referring to? Because it's been a few years since I've seen the movie, and
So how does
but
how
you know,
do-
it's
how does
different.
one live in a crawl space that requires you to use a ladder to get up and down and
Oh my
go
gosh.
completely
Okay, yes.
fucking unnoticed?
Yes,
How does one stash the ladder after they're in the crawl space? How does anyone apparently fit into a suit, even though one person is 5'2" and the other one is 6'8"?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just insulting of intelligence. It's not. It's just
I
not a well written film.
I honestly could have done without the suit with all the doodads on it. Like, can you just make a potion that makes you invisible? Can we just go with something simple? I like how that's simple though.
Yeah, right. The suit is a cool idea and based on real tech.
Yeah.
The problem I have with it is like, if this guy's this advanced with it, okay, and he's kind of this Elon Musk type character,
Pretty
right?
dumb.
Yeah,
if he's
exactly.
that
The rest of his plot is really freaking stupid. Like he can build a next generation invisible suit, but he can't figure out that going out in the rain in it is probably a bad idea. He's
Yeah.
as dumb as the aliens and Signs.
It kind of feels like they gimmicked the suit because again, we were trying to do a relaunch we were trying to launch the Dark Universe, right? And then the Tom Cruise mummy shit the bed. So
I like that movie a lot more than The Invisible Man.
yeah.
I just couldn't do it. I don't get it. I think they were trying to modernize these things way too much, and we really haven't gone back to these classic feels of these characters or these movies, the settings. I think anything we've had past the Hammer era definitely was just upgraded modernized versions or different takes on these characters. And if you wanted to reboot the true Universal Monster universe, you cannot stray too far from the essence of them, and they did. That's why they're failing.
You know what's a big shame, and it's something that I think about way too much because I'm mentally disabled. So I love that Hammer revisited the Universal catalog. I really do. But can you
I'm
imagine?
mentally disabled too, Lorne. It's okay.
It's okay. It's brotherhood. But can you imagine if AIP had, if Corman back in the Poe adaptation days had revisited the Universal monsters? There's something there in the look and the feel of those movies. Oh my God. it's a big missed opportunity that we can never get
Low-budget
back.
Grittiness of Corman. Oh man, that
Well,
would be.
but I'm talking the Price era, the Price, Barbara Steele, Mask of Red Death, Pit and the Pendulum. The headspace was right, and unfortunately, it never happened. So
That would have been awesome.
I honestly think
Kevin
that
X, welcome. Oh, he called upgrade too. I must
Yeah.
have missed that. Nice.
I also want to point out here, and once again, this could just be my opinion, but I think the original movie, the original Invisible Man, compared to the remake that they did, is a prime example of newer is not always better. So
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, I like Verhoeven a lot, but Hollow Man is unfortunately a hollow movie compared to the original, right? And the 1L film just it insults the audience, as modern films tend to do. There's something graceful about, especially James Whale, whereas he doesn't feel the need to talk down to his audience ever. He trusts that you're on page, and he just tells his story. And it's that kind of craftsmanship. I don't think it's impossible to do today. I just think there's no appetite from the studios to do it. They're not brave enough to trust their audience. So,
Agree.
hey, but before we go on to the next work, unmute for a second.
Yeah, what's up?
If you could be invisible, what would you do?
What would I do? In a video game, I would rob a bank.
You rock.
Honestly, his answer could have been a whole lot worse. So
I was hoping.
you're right.
I was thinking, that scene in 976 Evil 2 where Orc, I actually have a question for you.
Yeah, I do. Big Crack Rock has a good point. Every time I see a Coke or a Pepsi truck drive by, I'm like, man, like in the first Fast and the Furious, how they just hijacked that shit. I just want to do that so bad. And be like,
Can we Orc in the next Fast and Furious movie?
Orc and the Furious.
Yes.
Pork and the Furious.
And somebody make that poster, please. Orc and the Furious.
Orc, I've got a question for you. Okay, we've talked about two of these series, these franchises, whatever you want to call them. Thumbs up or thumbs down for either one if you've seen them. Even if you've only seen one of the movies in them.
The past two?
Yeah.
The whole franchise?
Or the characters themselves. If
yeah,
you're
the
not
characters
familiar
themselves.
Deeply, the Phantom of the Opera and the Invisible Man we've gone through so far.
I like Invisible Man a little bit more, but Phantom of the Opera is still great because it's so groundbreaking for the time. My favorite we'll get to later, but yeah.
Okay.
My top three we're gonna get to. Yeah. But want me just to spoil it quick?
No,
save it.
Save it.
I'll give you something to discuss. We'll move on. Well, in fact, these next 5 I think we have are what I consider, well, definitely 3 of them are the top 3 for the Universal monsters, but this next 5 is what I would say is the 5 of what people think of the Universal classic monsters. And towards the, I don't want to say lower end, but the back end, whatever. If we're finished with Invisible Man,
Yes.
let's do the creature from the Black Lagoon. And it contained this original fantastic masterpiece. Its sequel the next year, Revenge of the Creature, in 1955. And then The Creature Walks Among Us. And I think these were, or at least the first 2 were released in 3D. And these are the last of the Universal classic monster age. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you have to throw This Island Earth, which is smack dab in the middle of them, as part of that last hurrah. But those 4 films are it.
Clint Eastwood.
And they're very far removed from the end, because if you think about it, a decade had passed since the Universal Monsters was considered passe, and then here come these 4 movies to kind of bring it all back to life for a brief couple of years.
Well, and I got to tell you, Lorne, one we aren't counting, I don't have a poster for this, is an Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. Or no, excuse me, Meet the Creature. And it was actually a skit on the Colgate Comedy Hour on television.
Right. Yeah.
So that is one Abbott and Costello we're skipping. It's not official.
It's important to realize, like, in the 30s, like, the Universal films were event movies. Like, first of all, people dressed up to go to the movies. It wasn't at all like people streaming on their couch in underwear is where we're at now. But
I'm in my office and I have pants on, okay? I'm just saying.
I got some really short shorts on and no underwear.
Yeah. Well, how's that different than any other time when you're out and about town?
Free.
Jess, you're making me feel overdressed.
You look hot and warm.
So it's like it was a big deal to go to the movies, and in the 30s, like, the Universal films were all huge event films. All those stories you've heard about the Exorcist premiere were all said about Frankenstein.
Jess, can you stand up?
No.
Son. Sorry, continue, Lorne.
You're right, though, Lorne.
Cable Channel 11 After Dark.
Oh, my God. We'll see you on Open Bar. No, Lorne, you're right, though, that what people felt with The Exorcist going to the theater, walking out, being terrified, was for these types of movies, too. Well, the 30s, the 1930s ones, right?
By the 40s, they'd become matinee features, and they were made for a younger audience. So if you look at the Universal output in the 40s, they were made for less money. They were a lot less ambitious, and the directors, some of them were writers on the earlier films that got promoted to directing, but in general, they were more like assigned to the roles. They hadn't been a part of the development of the features. And you can tell. I mean, you can tell that there's a certain dispassionateness about those 40s films. But what happens, interestingly, is with Creature from the Black Lagoon, at least, Arnold comes in and he makes this incredibly fun movie. Creature is never scary, and it wasn't scary then either. But it's so fun you don't care. One of the things you always hear is that the Universal monsters are all sympathetic. But if you really think about it, like, we have no good reason to find the Creature sympathetic.
Not at all. But
we do.
Fun.
But we do, because it's such a cool concept. The suit looks so awesome. It kind of benefits from the way that most people feel about the Predator series, because the monster is so cool. We overlook the obvious, failures of the film. Except Creature doesn't have those failures. It's just kind of this fun, pulpy romp. Revenge of the Creature is probably too much of a romp, and it hasn't aged quite as well. It does have John Agar in the lead, which John Agar is like science fiction horror royalty because he was in everything for like 20 years. I love Creature Walks Among Us. I know it's a real split decision for people because it's slower, more introspective. It feels more like the 30s monster movies to me than the others in the series. It feels tragic.
So than the original or the first one?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely sympathetic to the monster for the right reasons in Creature Walks Among Us. I mean, it's a heartbreaking film. But again, it's real cheap compared to even the rest of its own series, which were all made on a budget, and you can tell that budget at times. The first film hides it very well because it's basically one set on a boat on the back lot, but and a lot of stock footage. Revenge of the Creature it wears its budget on its sleeve, and it's wonderful for it. But you can tell Universal didn't know what to do with the fact that they had a monster movie that made money again. So, but I know a lot of people love the Creature. He's probably the most popular for a lot of people of the monsters. So I'm eager to hear you guys.
Oh, that's interesting because I think of these last 5, he's probably I would have thought he was the least popular, but
he's a
I'm
faggot.
wrong many times. What was that, Orc?
Nothing.
Have you seen Julie Adams? I don't think he was. That's all I'm saying. That white bathing suit changed a generation of young men.
I have to agree with Lauren.
True.
Oh, I mean, we were talking about the monsters. I didn't know we were talking about the final girls or the.
Yeah, but who was the monster going after?
Well, yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
arguing that.
He was dicing up the locals, but he had other plans for her, I think.
My.
Yeah.
Know what I'm saying?
What is? Any other thoughts on the Creature movies, guys? The Creature itself.
Clint Eastwood, man.
What?
Briefly.
And Grave Abyss was saying, I don't know if I had been there or not in Camarillo. Is that what you mean?
Yep. All these goddamn Californians taking up all our air.
Hey,
Man.
California and Jersey, places where you can't get single-use plastic bags. What can I say?
Oh, that ticked me off when they switched. That happened before I moved back to the Midwest.
I
Now,
can't
first
do it
of
here,
all,
man.
Not to get on a rant, but back when we were growing up, you had the paper bags, fucking shit, and it was great. They bagged your groceries, it was free. And then they bring these plastic baggies. And I remember my mom back then saying, this doesn't make sense, and they were saying, well, this is going to be better because we're going to be saving trees with these plastic bags. Oh my God. And here, then they want to turn around, they ban them or charge you, and now charge you what? It was 10 cents, probably more now for a free paper bag you want, rather than going back and just giving.
No, you don't understand. In Jersey, single-use bags are banned. Period. There's no buying them.
So not
There's
even paper bags. Or
you can
buying
buy. You can buy a burlap bag. You can buy a bag that you can reuse, but you can a cloth bag. But you cannot if it's only meant to last for one trip. It is banned. So there's no more paper bags. There's no more plastic bags, with only a few cutout exceptions. It's madness.
So I'll buy one of those even thicker cloth bags or whatever, forget to use them, and they get moldy or whatever and throw them away, or they sit somewhere in the basement.
I was basically like a cat growing up, like the plastic bag was my favorite toy, and I might asphyxiate. They've taken that away from a generation of children, and I think that's a tragedy that we need to fix.
Well,
I say
I use them in
we legalize the bags and
trash.
lawn darts. Don't forget your lawn darts, but that's federal. And you legalize them, and then you send a plastic bag to every kid in America. That's how you fix this problem.
Amen.
And cut down on future population at the same time, which it has to be ecologically better for the planet anyway, right? Less kids. All works.
Well, I have yet to meet a cat owner that isn't constantly using their plastic bags for the litter box to clean those out.
Or many people with an extra small trash can in their rooms or bathrooms or.
Yeah. I mean, but Austin also
used.
That's where the cups for the mouthwash go, not the cat shit.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Where's my mouthwash Dixie cups going? If I put cat shit in there,
those are wasteful. I don't use those. I just use the top of the mouthwash.
That's how herpes gets spread.
Well, thank God nobody in the house has herpes.
If one does, all of them are gonna.
If you can dump the cup without touching it to your lips.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of mad Tom Cruise cocktail nonsense is that?
What if it's if it's going through a funnel, it's probably fine. We're not going to speak of where the funnel is, though.
Well, I just won't borrow any mouthwash at your house, Sam and Chris.
Fair
do you know about this?
I just want to point out that the whole plastic bag thing, just speaking as an old wrestling fan, how are future generations of Hulk Hogan fans ever going to get to tear off a plastic shirt?
What do you mean plastic? Those were.
Are you talking about the Halloween costumes? That's what I thought you meant.
No. You get your grocery bags, right? The plastic bags. You cut the bottom out, you put it on as a shirt, and then you can tear it off like Hulk Hogan.
You can't asphyxiate if you make holes in them. You missed the point of my entire screed. I was trying to convince children.
I was trying to make another point.
Oh, I see.
I'm not. I'm going to assume that I'm not too old to do that, even though I'm 38.
Hey, do you know there's people every
never-
year that drown in mud puddles, so it's all relative.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, we only have paper straws, pretty much in Jersey as well, because this state is madness. But great bagels, great pizza, you know. People talk in full
Yeah.
sentences, still use
People
subject and
talking
predicate.
full sentences. Got him.
That's the trade-off.
Damn it. All right.
Spicy. I like it.
Spicy. All right, Creature from the Black Lagoon.
One more thing.
There we go.
Just kind of hit me. If I remember right, I think Creature's like the only one that really seems like it's set in a more modern time of these main monster movies. Everything else seems like it's set in like Europe, like somewhere in the past, or some hybrid of the past and present.
I get you. Because
Captive Wild Woman definitely takes place contemporarily to when it was made. But it's a good and some of the later Mummy films definitely take place contemporarily. But you a good point, that a lot of them do take place in an undefined 18th century world.
I think like, and we'll talk about it later, but the Wolfman, I think that you got gypsies, and then when Lon Chaney Jr. arrives, he arrives in a car. So
Yeah, it's very wishy-washy when any of these things. In fact, in Frankenstein versus Bride of Frankenstein, although they take place conjoined, there's very explicit 40-year gap between those movies that can't happen because they take place right after each other. So what are you gonna do? I mean, it's not like
it's one of the things I love about them. So
yeah, it's not like continuity today has gotten any better with these games. So.
that is true.
Well, I am going to have to bounce a little early because I am starting to fall asleep. And it's not that the conversation isn't interesting. It's that I've been up since 3:30. So I hope you will all pardon my rudeness.
well, thanks for
We
coming
do,
on,
because
Sam.
we love you, Sam. Thank you for joining us as you did, and I'm glad we did the Invisible Man series first. So
Thank you. It was awesome to
your
talk
favorite.
about that. All right. We all
We'd
have a good day.
ask you to read off your socials before you leave, but
I'm on Instagram,
Oh
fucker.
shit, son!
God, just twist the knife, Lorne. Twist it counterclockwise.
you're the best. Stop.
So you cannot find Sam on Twitter, but
You will
Well-
find me on Instagram and Facebook continuing to cause authentic chaos as true to my nature.
and she
And who knows, under
GBs.
new ownership, maybe that'll change.
What?
Under new
Probably
Twitter
not.
ownership, maybe that'll change.
Probably not.
Buy a Tesla.
All right, bye guys. Y'all have a nice evening.
You too,
Bye.
Sam.
Thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
on, Sam.
Oh gosh, got close.
Oh
up there.
wow, I'm bigger.
That's what she said.
Oh, beat me to it.
Wait,
Oh,
why would she say that?
I don't know. The Mummy.
The Mummy. Hey.
Series of movies. We start off with good old Boris Karloff, but immediately it kind of reboots itself within its own series with The Mummy's Hand. So you
Yeah.
go from, what was that? What
Karis.
was the original Mummy year?
Mummy it's 30, 33, 30, 32. It's
32.
Yep.
So then we jump to 1940.
That's my favorite type of porn.
Oh yeah?
Oh god.
yeah. So
The Mummy's Tomb, number 3, 1942, followed by Mummy's Ghost in 44, and also in 44 you have The Mummy's Curse.
Mummy's Curse.
And then, of course, because we have to have it, Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy was 1955.
You know, they met a whole lot of these people, but they didn't stick around, did they?
No, not at
No.
all. I don't
Bad
even like
house
putting
guests.
those up there, but they are official. There's not much I can do about that. So yeah, I think that's
I
what's
now
on
have
the
this fear that
movies.
Orc and Dan are going to work together on some way to twist all these titles into something pornographic.
Maybe it
I'm
might
sure
happen.
they'll do that
Next
on air,
s'mores
off
indoors.
air,
Could
private
be a possibility.
conversations. So a lot of these for me are familiar. I'll bring this up again, I'm sure, in Dracula, but my mom grew up with more of the Hammer horrors when she was a teenager. And so those are some of the mummies and Draculas that I remember the most. But I do remember we had some VHS cassettes that she did pick up of the Mummy's Hand, the original Mummy's Hand. I think either the Mummy's Ghost or the Mummy's Curse we had as well, and watched those. And then recently, a couple of those were also on Svengoolie in the last year or so. I've watched, and they're fun. They're fun. There's not too much more I can say about it. I have a good time with these monster movies. They're good to catch. They're not something I go back to and watch every year, obviously, but they're very
Yeah.
enjoyable.
The first film is obviously so different than the rest of the series. The first film is kind of this big Egypt Gothic like drama, really, and Karloff is great. A bandaged mummy is barely in the movie. The great opening sequence is kind of played for laughs, actually, even though there's a vicious murder involved. But it lets Karloff kind of go off his scary, diatribes constantly, and it's a great performance from Karloff. The rest of the series is kind of just Frankenstein films with bandages. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of what it is. There's films that take place in New Orleans. There's films that take places in New England. We never discuss how the mummy's getting around. Sometimes he walks into a swamp at the end. Sometimes he walks out of the swamp at the beginning, but they don't necessarily match up because they're not the same swamp. But they're kind of amazing films for being fun, pulpy, Saturday afternoon VHS or UHF, like time wasters that you'll just smile ear to ear with. Obviously, I prefer Karloff's performance to Chaney's performances because, one wasn't drunk all the time. But, the Mummy's Ghost you mentioned as one that you think you owned on VHS. Fascinating story about that. So Aquanetta was originally supposed to be the heroine of that film, and she was fired right before filming began. And the story she told Fangoria in an early issue of the magazine when they still covered classic horror before it became all about latex and Linnea Quigley's body. She was asked about what would happen with Mummy's Ghost, and she talked about the fact that she wouldn't sleep with the head of the studio, so she ended up getting kicked from the film and losing her multi-film contract. And then she married a used car salesman, lived out in Arizona, and eventually was in a couple TV movies, and then
Good for
died.
her. I mean, sadly, that story doesn't surprise me. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, well, that's what she told Fangoria. Whether it's real or not, I mean, who knows? She also lied about her lineage. She refused to identify her race, kept saying very different things. They billed her as the Venezuelan volcano, but then she said that different times she said she was Native American, other times she said she was African American. No one really knows, and with a stage name like Aquanetta, it could be anything. All
It's
I could say is,
believe a liar. So yeah, that her credentials.
yeah. But I mean, I love her performances in what she is, what we do have her in. So, and she was, gorgeous, obviously. I have her book of poetry over there signed, but she was a better actress than she was a poet. And honestly, for being honest, she wasn't a great actress. I just love her.
So did you get to meet her, or did you just happen to come across a signed copy?
I bought it off of Amazon in the early days of Amazon. When Amazon launched the Amazon, what was it called back then? Now it's like Amazon Shops or something, but back then it was a marketplace. I mean, I think it was just called Amazon Marketplace, where people could sell used books and Amazon didn't sell everything under the the globe back then either. It was basically books, movies, music. And there was a used copy in very rough shape. And that's kind of what I was always looking for, because I didn't want to pay a lot of money for it, because I didn't think I'd actually be terribly interested in her poetry. But the idea of owning something from a classic Universal star was, it was powerful. So I was like, oh, look, $10? Yeah, for hardcover, first edition, sure, I'll buy that. It came and it was beat up to hell, and it opens up to the opening leaf page, and it's a signed copy. Now, it's not signed to me. It's signed to someone else, but... And then I of course, went online immediately to like see other examples of her signature, and it's unmistakable. It would be so incredibly easy to authenticate, because her signature itself is a piece of artwork, because it's so intricate and bizarre. And of course, the rest of the messages in broken English, which was often also part of her like signature. So, but yeah, that's why she's not in Mummy's Ghost, which is a shame, because Mummy's Ghost is probably the funniest of the sequels.
That's a cool story. I miss the old days of Amazon. Yep.
I miss the old days of Amazon. I miss the old days of eBay, when people were selling stuff because they just wanted it out of the basement and they didn't know what they had.
Borders, you know. Yep.
Well,
Yep.
I lived at Borders pretty much.
That was every Friday night for me. Borders, go out to eat, and then see a movie.
Yeah,
That
Borders
sounds
was
like a great time.
amazing.
I
I
don't
love
even
Barnes
think
and Noble.
we
Don't
have
get me
that much
wrong.
anymore.
I love Barnes and Noble, but Borders was my jam. And my peanut butter and my bread.
Well, did you have B. Dalton books back in the day, or was that just sort of a regional chain?
We had
did.
B. Dalton. We had B. Dalton. That was more of a mall chain, though.
Mall one. Yep, that was in our mall.
You had Walden Books. You had B. Dalton. They were the big mall chains, and they were both good for things, different things.
They didn't have the biggest selection. But
No, but and then like I know we don't have Maximilian books up here, Books a Million books up here. But every time I travel south, I always find one, and that I can't say they're completely satisfying, but I love being in bookstores that I can't visit here. Also, the Strand bookstore in New York, of course. If you have the time, because there's no organization whatsoever and they're proud of it. If it was ever in print, it's probably somewhere there, because it's a city block worth of books.
Grave, I noticed his comment. He said, "Let's get to the fun titles. The Black Cat and the Raven. Black Cat contains a better constructed friendship than any of the Star Wars prequels." Now, I did mention at the beginning, don't hate us, Grave, that I did mention those two movies. They are great films. We're not getting too far into detail of those. I mean, I guess, unless Lorne has a comment for you.
No, listen, they're
those
great
are
movies.
Those are great.
You know, I don't usually pimp out Scream Factory for anything, because everyone knows my feelings on their recent track record. But they do have those Universal monster collections that are and that's where you can get a lot of the extended titles that aren't on those big Universal monster, collections, like the one you have at work, or the one that has the sequels to all those films. If you want the side titles, listen, it's a great collection. You got the British copy, I see. The British copy also was available as a coffin set, which is beautiful, but adds like $50 for packaging. And I guess everyone knows how I feel about that too. Yeah, no, I mean, those Universal sets, I have issues with some of them, but they're good. They're a real good place to visit all the... They focus too much on the Karloff and Lugosi side more than anything else, and they include at least one film that's not actually a Universal production, Monster and the Gorilla and the Girl. But whatever.
I mean, I am thankful that they're still putting them up there, and not just kind of tossing them to the side. These films are getting the respect, like 90 years later, that they do deserve.
No one's even going to remember any of us in 90 years, but these movies are going to be still trucking.
I hope they are. The Mummy terrorizes swamps more.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I don't know where that creative decision came from, but even when Hammer do their Mummy film, we get him wandering in and out of water and that too. It just seems to be a thing.
I think we will touch on the Hammer ones eventually.
Oh yeah,
Sort of
we
like we're
get
doing
there.
here. There's another one we can't go through each individual one.
Well, you should definitely do a Hammer show, man.
A Hammer show would be fun. I think we'll do that down the road. I am, like I said, I kind of grew up with those more than these, even, especially like the Draculas, Christopher Lee. Sorry, I'm going through. I wish I could multitask better.
Wow, look, so much love for Walden books, huh?
That is pretty sweet. Borders. So yeah, the Mummy. Final thoughts before we carry on. We're getting to the big three, as I would call it. Maybe
So wait, before we go, Imhotep or Karis? Where do you stand? Because I'm obviously an Imhotep guy.
Karis.
Oh.
I think just because it's more familiar to me.
I'd say Emotep, but just because there's more of a modern day. There are more modern movies that deal with him than Karis. So, and yes, I'm talking about the Brendan Fraser movies. Even though they're not horror, they were still whatever.
It's not.
But just because, even though they're not horror, I think the first two that he did were really good. So
we don't want to get into my feelings on them, so keep moving.
Okay.
We'll just piss off people about their childhood again.
We do. All right, going in, like I said, this is what I would call the big three, these next three of this time, arguably. And this first movie technically isn't a part of the series, really, but it is a precursor to The Wolfman, Werewolf of London. And I did watch this, I think, in the last 6 months. Again, on Svengoolie. Not bad. Not bad at all. Definitely no Wolfman, but it's good. And, of course, the Wolfman. So, Werewolf in London was 1935. The Wolfman, 1941. And The Wolfman didn't really get any direct sequels. So its sequels were Frankenstein meets The Wolfman. And this is probably the first, mashup movie, your multiverse versus movie. This started it all, Frankenstein meets The Wolfman.
fuck you, Marvel.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't have Freddy versus Jason or Puppet Man versus Demonic Toys, which I'm sure maybe Lorne would be pleased with. But
I'm a huge Puppet Master fan and a Demonic Toys fan, and even I don't like that one.
And, well, each to their own.
So, interestingly, Wolfman is 41. In 1942, Fox, 20th Century Fox, released Undying Monster as a response. And I think that's actually the better film. If you want a really great, moody, atmospheric werewolf film that almost feels like a haunted house film. Yeah, don't sleep on that just because it's not a Universal classic. It's of that era, it's my favorite werewolf film. Obviously, it's not my favorite overall because there's a film called The Beast Must Die that comes out in the 70s that I just have too much fun with. But I'm not a Wolfman fan.
Wow,
Just
I know.
not.
I'm kind of surprised that you said that. Just said that, yeah.
It's partially the Cheney problem. I love Lugosi's Bila, the gypsy in the beginning. He's awesome. It's one of those iconic Lugosi roles. But Jesus Christ, can we just stop with Lon Chaney's mopey face? And I don't know. Is that the thinnest developed love story ever on film? By the way, there's no reason.
I'm surprised he's the one one actor of all these like main monsters that he played the Wolfman in I think all the movies. Nobody replaced him as the
Sure,
Wolfman.
sure. He also played the Frankenstein's monster. Not my favorite performance of the monster.
Oh,
Um,
definitely not.
I,
Which brings up he was
Cheney.
in House of Frankenstein. That was the next one I think after this that
Yep.
the Wolfman appeared.
And that opening, of course, of that film is basically Jason Lives, because that's where the influence was drawn from. But
House of
yeah, no,
Dracula.
Cheney doesn't work for me the way that all the other classic actors do. Partially because he was a younger actor, and his benchmarks for acting were very different. Like the Lugosi, Karloff, Atwill, all those guys came from a generation of actors that had started during the silence. They were more theatrical, which a lot of people would see as a negative, but in this kind of production where everything's heightened, I think it added so much. Cheney is trying to do some weird of mice and men thing, which he did on stage, and he's still trying to do it in all these movies. And to me, it's just insufferable. He definitely drags down the Wolfman for me. I don't know if even if wasn't for his performance, I know it wouldn't be a favorite. The makeup school, cool. So it's kind of the Predator thing again. Make a good movie about that monster, and I'll be all in line.
The makeup is very cool, and I think that is one of the highlights of the Wolfman series.
Of all of these movies, The Wolfman's actually my favorite.
I'm sorry.
I love all the scenes where they're in the woods and the fog and all of that. I like that a lot more than I do most of the other movies that we've talked about. So
It is the classic imagery that fog in the woods and the Wolfman, hiding in the trees or coming around. The character is one of probably my top three favorites. I guess if I really thought about the films themselves, it may not be. Because the Invisible Man films are a lot of fun. And like we talked about, some great effects for the time. The Mummies, watched a lot of them. Possibly even more than the Wolfman movies or the Wolfman itself. So, but I do love the character.
oh, the story in the at least in the first one basically is no good deed goes unpunished. I mean, he's trying to or save somebody from being attacked by the werewolf. He gets bit, and then I think he spends the rest of the series trying to like get somebody to kill him or whatever. And
several people do, but it doesn't seem to work.
well, of course not.
Um,
See, that's the great thing about these movies, though, is that they didn't care about, you know, as we talked about before, continuity or anything. So it was just, you brought him back however you wanted to bring him back, and it was the rest of the movie was just fun. So
I think part of my problem is also just this is not a slam on Cheney for once, is that the sympathy we have for the Universal monsters, even Dracula, which is really interesting, because Dracula doesn't particularly have any sympathetic qualities, and yet we kind of want him to win. And even audiences back in the day kind of loved to hate him. Whereas the Wolfman is so obviously sympathetic in kind of just a melodramatic way that it's a little bit less interesting than the Frankenstein's monster that, drowns a little girl. Doesn't necessarily mean to do it, but can you forgive that act? Kidnaps a man's fiance on her wedding night, threatens to kill her. But yet that whole he didn't ask for this is built into the character in such a subtle way because they don't go out of their way. I mean, maybe Bride a little bit, some of the dialogue might be right on the nose, but it's appropriately on the nose and it's still poetic. Whereas I think Wolfman is just, it's a little bit laid on the table too much for me. That said, I love the fact that you guys love it because it means you're watching classic horror and you love it. That's awesome to me.
Hell yeah.
Orc, any
I would
thoughts?
rank this probably Wolfman's probably my third favorite. Yeah. Lon Chaney's a pimp.
So you would
Yep.
consider the
Wait,
Wolfman
senior or
to be
junior?
like the big three.
Senior, junior, great grandpa, junior, Chaney, all the
Well,
Cheneys.
actually, I think it's Lon Chaney Jr.'s grandson did House of the
How's the
Wolfman.
Wolf? Have you
So
seen
you're
it?
gonna say House
No,
of
I have
Thousand
not seen it.
Corpses?
I've seen what I think was a
It's
trailer for it, but I haven't
it
actually seen
it
the
exists.
movie.
It's a real film. It doesn't hold a candle to classic Universal War, but it has a lot of love. Um, it's worth watching if you love classic horror. You're not gonna. It's not gonna. You're not gonna discover a new favorite, but it's worth watching.
Is it? I think that what I saw was in color. Is the whole movie in color? Or did he?
It is. But I mean, I think it never made the transfer to jump from DVD to any high def format, but it's available.
All right. Well, I'll have to check that out.
I really wish I could remember this story. I don't know if I had ever told you, Kory. One of the shoots we did with Schwarzenegger, we did it at a producer's house, one of the executive producers, for his governorship, and it was in Toluca Lake. And the house the producer owned, we're in the backyard by Toluca Lake, and the filming in the back, and his office space for Arnold. Anyway, the son there, he was telling me this house was, and I forget whose it was. It was either Bela Lugosi's, Lon Chaney's, or Boris Karloff's house in Toluca Lake. And I cannot remember for the life of me which one of those three's house it was.
That's cool.
Yeah, but it's cool. I
So
wish I could remember.
So you immediately like stole the doormat or something, right?
I wish I would have thought of something like. I'm sure it was all new stuff in there, obviously, other than the architecture of the house. But
Same maid,
oh god,
Una O'Connor's still there.
I mean, this
Hello.
was at least 15 years ago when that.
Buddy, I'm coming. Okay, sorry.
Oh, we have a question in the chat. I don't know what it is, so hopefully it's not horrible, Big T. I'm just pulling it up. In your gentleman's personal opinion, gentlemen, there are a lot of Universal Monsters set out there on Blu-ray and DVD. Which one do you recommend?
This one in coffin form, like Lorne was saying, is really cool to own. It looks really cool on your shelf.
I went the long route and bought the legacy collections for each one. So.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Did they release that for all 8 or 9 of them?
Yeah, I think so.
I only bought the first 2. Shit.
Yeah, I've got
Well, and isn't there an
Dracula,
ultimate
Frankenstein, the
box that basically
Wolfman.
has like 30-some movies in it?
You can go out to Walmart right now, and get Dracula and Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Lorne, is the best?
So it depends on
Way
what
to
you
buy 'em.
want. Like I'm a big proponent always of buying, the media that you actually want. And don't collect anything you don't. If there's something you really don't love, don't buy it. Don't be a completist. Instead, get everything you love. Because there's something you love out there that you don't own, and you're being a completist saying, I really need 7 copies of Curse of Michael Myers. What are you doing?
Agreed.
Don't buy it again. Go out and buy something you love. So it depends. Like for me, those Scream Factory Universal Horror Collection, the 6 volumes, and they're essential to me because it's easy to get the Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, even Invisible Man films. They're very available. Maybe Invisible Man, actually the later sequels, that's kind of more recent to be as available, but everything else has been. I remember as a kid, Dracula's Daughter was the hard one to find of those, but now it's everywhere. But those side titles that are a little bit less known, I love them. And unfortunately, there's no one collection that's going to give you all of it, all 42 or 43 titles. So, figure out what you love. All of this stuff is available streaming somewhere. Watch them, figure out what you love, what you want to add to your collection, and do so. If it's something that's been pressed in the last 10 years, it's not going to be a bad print, period. So, And none of these films have miraculously found more footage that should be inserted or something. So I always hope for that extra reel from Bride of Frankenstein with Dwight Fry's murder plot to be reinstated in the movie, but it never will be.
Don't
So,
be like certain YouTubers and buy this and then never open it because you've seen most of the films.
wow.
Oh yeah.
See, and that's the one I've got.
That is the only one I have as well. I thought I bought Dracula too, but I didn't.
Those I went out and got for each one that they released. I got one. So
Chris, I don't think that was necessarily a shot at H6 itself. It was just that the way some of us collectors, I mean, I've been a completist at times going, oh, I really don't like this sequel, but I've got to have the entire franchise, so I'm going to get it even though I don't like it. But
you want a shot at it? I could do that too.
I'm sure he could. I love Halloween 6.
I love Halloween 6
more
too.
one that
Guitars.
if I own a copy and it plays clear enough for me, I don't care whether it's Blu-ray or DVD, I'm not going to buy it until that copy is really starting to wear out.
So Jess, I'm with you. I can't say that's always true. Like if a film's my precious top 25 list, right, is the films that I will upgrade probably as many times as they issue them in upgradable forms.
Alien in 4K.
And I'm 4K.
Yeah, exactly. But outside those top 25 films, I'm probably okay. You know, if I own it on DVD and I'm happy with the DVD,
yeah,
I'm probably not going to upgrade it simply because it's some shiny new edition comes out.
Well, if you can see the movie clear enough and you can hear it fine, I want to watch the movie, like you always say. I want to watch the movie. That's the most important thing to me.
And
I don't need it. Some I don't even want in like 4K or even HD Blu-ray, because I think sometimes the clarity takes away from that beautiful filter grittiness that I want. I don't want to see their pores.
Well, so that's kind of like a bigger discussion than universal horror, but I think it's an important one, which is we watch movies for different reasons. And that's what sometimes gets missed in these conversations. When I hear people say, oh, I never want to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on anything but a grainy VHS tape that's been circulated for 25 years. And I sit there and go, I don't want to ever get the headache from watching it like that. I want it cleaned up because it's a great film that looks like it's supposed to look. Now, no one is right or wrong. Someone is placing a value on a very specific type of experience that probably relates to the first time they saw it or how they saw it multiple times at critical points in their life, whether it was when they were young or whether they were going through a tough time. And they want to recreate those moments. That's legit. I would never mess with that. For myself, I want movies, generally speaking, looking as good and feeling as good as they can, if I care about them. Now, a film I don't care about, yeah, give me it looking like shit, fine, because whatever, I'm never going to watch it again. There's a reason I don't collect comedies or action films, right?
Yeah.
But I think that is like, it's important when people start to criticize why people watch films on certain formats. Don't do it. If someone wants to watch on Laserdisc because that's how they like to watch the movies, good for them.
At least
why is it
the film they love?
Right, and it's trying to evoke how they feel about that film. They don't want it to evolve. I've said a million times there's films that I love that I never want to watch again because I'm worried that inevitably they're going to come down to earth, and I'd rather live with the memory of them being that great film that I had a great night with. Other films I could watch a million times and they only keep getting better, but that's a rare breed. Like the original Cat People is a film that is, to me, better on every watch. But that's a rare film. I probably won't watch the original Halloween more than 5 more times in my life, and probably only if it's in theaters. I own it. It sits on the shelf. I'll probably never watch a home video version of it. Because, unfortunately, I've reached that saturation point that it can only be downhill from now. And that's a personal thing. That's not a value statement about the film. It's about me. And that's ultimately what it is about. Is as viewers, we're trying to have the most, hopefully, we're trying to have the most fun with these movies as we possibly could. So however your path is with that, go for it. So what box should you buy on this? Yes. You should buy exactly what you love. And you should not buy a thing that you're not going to watch.
And for some of us, that's a pizza box.
I recently sent a pizza box to Christian Hannah Horror, by the way.
Really?
He'll have
The Stranger Things one?
he'll have to explain that if he chooses.
Oh.
Beautiful. Well, we could talk all night, but we should press on. If you don't have any last thoughts on the Wolfman or the werewolf movies of that era for Universal.
The lead female in this movie is gorgeous.
The one
That's
that's coming
true.
up?
No, and the Wolfman.
And the Wolfman, the original Wolfman.
Yeah.
Okay. What's her name? Is it?
Oh
Patrice?
God, I
Bela Lugosi.
That would be Evelyn Ankers.
Evelyn Ankers. Oh, why is her name so? It's so small.
Well, I think that's her debut.
Because she's
That's
a
probably
woman.
what. I mean, listen, Evelyn Ankers, do yourself an IMDb check, man. Amazing career.
Okay. Well, I think Lorne's possibly favorite franchise. I know one of his favorite movies of all time is in this. So we have Frankenstein.
I don't think it's
1931.
one of his favorite movies. I think it
It is the
his
favorite. You're right. And
yeah.
It's right here. It's The Bride of Frankenstein, 1935.
Overrated. Come
Perfect
on.
film.
No.
Perfect film, even in its flaws.
It's definitely not my favorite film of all time, but it is a great, great piece of cinema. Great film. Fun film. It's third one, Son of Frankenstein. What is your thought on these as they go on, Lorne?
So Sun is clearly an uneven film. It does have sequences that I think are awesome, and Lugosi steals that movie. His one of the two performances as Igor. He just rolls through that film, and you just want him all the time. Karloff, you can see, is at the end of his rope. They made some mistakes in developing the film. The monster is mute again after speaking in Bride, which is just a weird choice. And there's another case of this where they're about in between the next two films, between this film and its sequel, Ghost to Frankenstein, whereas it's clear that the monster was blinded at the end of Son of Frankenstein. And unfortunately, Chaney's performance was meant as a pantomime blind performance, but since they never established that in the film, it kind of weighs down Chaney's already kind of belabored performance even worse. Ghost is it might be the low point for the character, honestly.
Evelyn
Glenn,
Akers?
yeah, I mean, and Lugosi again, and they're trying, but the movie's more of a slog. Glenn Strange would bring some life, but what are you gonna do?
Number 5 in the Frankenstein. Hold on. Because the number 5 is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which we had earlier. I'll get by that. And number 6, Frankenstein, I think, has the most.
If you count the mashups, because they tend to get counted in multiple franchises.
They do. I mean, well, like Freddy versus Jason, to me, it's a Friday the 13th and it's a Nightmare on Elm Street. So these are all for them in their respected series. And then number 7, Frankenstein, with House of Dracula, which we'll go back more to that. And of course, I'm sure it's one of Lorne's favorites again.
It's the best of the Abbott and Costello meets films, and Glenn Strange is pretty great in it. It's actually Glenn Strange's best performance as the monster. So, so there you are. So it's funny, and this is horrible self-promotion, I understand, but when I had Sarah Karloff on, her relationship with the Frankenstein series was that she wasn't allowed to watch them. And it strangely, it kind of was never partially it was availability, because again, no VHS, no home video, no streaming. The thing had to play at a theater, and you had to go see it. And she wasn't allowed to go see her father's work, most of her father's work.
I want to
And
interrupt this great story, but to fill the audience in, Lorne did a fantastic interview on his channel, Visited by Voices One, with the daughter of Boris Karloff.
And amazing.
It's still one of my favorite interviews you've done, and you've done some great ones. So go on.
Well, it was certainly it was surreal for me, but you'd expect it to be surreal for me. But so for years she hadn't seen the movies, and she knew that it was a big deal in her dad's career, but she really didn't ever have. She just didn't want to see her dad as a monster, and this culminates in one of my favorite things that's ever been said on my channels, which is the stories that's been told on my channel, which is eventually as she has kids, she's an adult, and her dad calls her and says, if you're not doing anything, if you have some free time on television, there's going to be a half-hour show that I did. I think it's pretty good. I think you could watch it with the boys. And this was a big deal for her because she's thinking, I've never really been able to watch my dad's work. And so he thought the thing he thought was pretty good was How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And it was the first time she got to really see and enjoy her dad's work. That, she'd seen everything by now, right? And there's The Black Cat's the film she hates with a passion because it's too violent. She hates looking at her father as such a masochistic psychotic, right? But it was really a sweet story to kind of humanize Karloff, that he was a guy who protected his daughter from himself in many ways. So anyway,
Please
whatever.
check that interview out on his channel.
Yeah, it's better when she says it than
a couple years now, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be real lazy, if you go to my channel, there's a trailer for my channel on my splash page, and her telling the very tail end of that story is part of that. But obviously, the Frankenstein series is completely DNA fuel for me. Like, this is stem cell horror for me. It's kind of where a lot of this stuff came from for me. And Bride of Frankenstein, I think, is the perfect film in the genre. It's thoughtful, it's soulful, it's funny, and the humor still works. It's mean, but it's mean in a playful way. Dr. Pretorius is probably one of my favorite characters to ever grace the screen. Ernest Thesiger just is magnetic. He's it's more than that. He's like the influence of a planet on another planet. It's a form of gravity. He's amazing. He can't take your eyes off him. He's the biggest dickhead villain ever, but yet you love him. Every second he's on the screen, you're just transfixed. Karloff is at his absolute best in his entire career. He didn't want the monster to speak. He didn't like the dynamics of the screenplay. And yet he just turned in like this show-stopping, amazing performance. Elsa Lanchester, what more can you say about the fact that you're given 4 minutes of screen time to be a classic screen character, and she pulls it off? The moment she turns from kind of the weeping bride who's like scared of everything, and she's scared of Pretorius, and she's crouching and holding herself up against Dr. Frankenstein, to the hissing, like, nasty monster that's hiding just beneath when she's cornered. Oh my God, it's all brilliant. The fact that it's about being an outsider. Unfortunately, when the movie Gods and Monsters was made, it kind of made people think of the film only as a metaphor for being gay, but it was clearly meant as far wider of a metaphor for just being an outsider. So anyone who ever felt like the weirdo, anyone who felt like the social outcast, you can relate to this movie on a number of levels. Like, there's so many, all these characters, every single one of them is an outcast in some way, and none of them fit together. But in this wonderful fantasy world, because it is fantasy world, it's far less realistic than Frankenstein. Pretorius's creations that he created from whole cloth. He didn't build them from dead bodies or in jars. You have the mermaid and you have the king. And it's kind of this weird self-aware absurdity, but it doesn't stop the momentum of the film. and you buy into this fantasy world. Weird side story, because this is not going to, no one wants to hear me say this, but I'm going to do it anyway. The only other time I ever felt that a film could do that and get away with it was in Joe Dante's Piranha. There's a weird ass scene where there's a little monster running around that's not in any way related to the rest of the film, but it works because the playfulness that Joe Dante brought to all of his work is there. The other place would be Gremlins 2, where, you know, I mean, that film has that like go for broke on everything attitude that Bride has. Even Bride of Chucky, which not a favorite film of mine, but you know what? That was not just name checking Bride of Frankenstein. It tried to capture some of the manic energy of that film, and to some degree succeeds. You know, I don't think completely.
Maybe not completely, but I love that one, and we saw it in the theater. Kory and
So did
Jess
I.
Together.
I don't think it rewatches quite as well as that first watch, but yeah, I agree.
The love has lost over the years a little bit. I mean, I still think it's great for a Chucky movie, but
yeah,
it amazed me when I first saw it.
How did you guys find to watch these films for the first time?
These older ones?
Yeah, the Frankenstein films.
Oh, again, I was pretty little. I think some of them might have caught on TV playing on cable. I feel like some of them played during the day rather than even at night.
I'm going to interject real quick. I never rented any of these at all. Turner Classic Movies was my main go-to.
I was thinking like TNT during a weekend day. Sometimes I feel like I maybe saw them when I was little, and then I don't know if we owned any on VHS. So again, bits and pieces. I obviously remember the classic scenes, and I don't know if that's from watching the full films young or just seeing snippets in like movie making stuff or movie documentaries. But yeah.
For me, it was actually probably one of the last actors you'd think would get somebody interested in watching old horror movies. But actually, when I kind of fell into this whole Humphrey Bogart thing, I bought the Maltese Falcon because it was $5 out at Walmart, and I figured it's supposed to be a classic. I'll check it out, and if I don't like it, I'm out $5. And I ended up loving that movie, and it kind of got me to start buying other black and white movies. And at that point, I was like, well, you know, I don't own any of these old Universal monster movies, so I'll check those out. Otherwise, I'd only seen, like Jess was saying, little clips and stuff. You watch the Weird Science TV show, they use clips from Bride in the opening of that. And so otherwise, that was the only time I ever saw anything about those was just in different clips that you would see on TV.
And of course, Bogart was in Return of Dr. X. So
Yes.
He's not completely divorced.
No, but it was a movie he was forced to do. He didn't want to do it.
Oh, clearly. but
he's still the best part of that movie.
Oh, I agree with that. I'm not a fan of either Dr. X films necessarily. I own them because I'm a masochist for all this stuff, but
that was the only horror movie he ever did in his career.
Correct. So I mean, we know what my favorite of this franchise is, but what about you guys?
I have to say the original. You'd made a comment about when he throws the little girl in the lake. The fact that what they're doing just before he does that is probably one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen in a movie, because I'm assuming because he feels that because they're throwing flowers in this lake or whatever, pretty things float. So he picks up the little girl and throws her in.
Yeah, it's like a child's expression of love that they don't understand consequence. It's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Cut from prints for nearly 60 years, unfortunately.
That's right. That was one of the scenes that was.
It's only the shot of the little girl actually entering the water, but it's still very clear in the soundtrack. The sound is still there. And also, of course, the iconic line, which everyone knew, by the way. It was just no longer in the film. Like, everyone knew the "By God, now I feel now I know what it is to be God" during the creation scene. Everyone knew that line through, like, just word of mouth and osmosis and books you'd read, but it wasn't in the film for 60 years. So I can respect loving the first film more than
I was gonna
the
say,
sequels. I just can't agree.
Yeah, and I know you disagree. I think I do lean towards the first one more than Bride, but they are both fantastic movies. And I've gotten a kick out. And don't ask me which one, because it's been a while since I've watched these. It might have been just watching like The Ghost of Frankenstein. I think I've seen those even more recently, something like that. It was either Ghost or I don't think it was House. It was Ghost.
Well, again, if you're a Lugosi fan, you know, Son and Ghost are like crack because he's just awesome in them.
But I think all three of these, the big three guys who were the monsters here, Chaney, Lugosi, and Karloff.
Strange.
I think they're all equally brilliant in their own. And Glenn Strange. But then we're gonna have to start listing off some of the other ones who filled in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the sad thing is, I guess, a lot of people have played the monster since, right? Whether you're talking about Christopher Lee, whether you're talking about Robert De Niro. I can't think of his name. The guy who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in those awful Star Wars films. Yeah. There's a stage production that they filmed. It's interesting that, like, the character is so adaptable, and yet, even with a title like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, no one has bothered to adapt the source material directly.
Even the De Niro one, it strayed, didn't it?
It strays hugely. It tries, by adding the wraparound Arctic expedition to the movie, they try to convince you that they're adapting it, but they're not. I mean, where the college, like Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, before he's Dr. Frankenstein, is a college student. In fact, he's a college student pretty much for the novel. He goes away to college. He gets expelled because he goes to a bookshop and finds a book of occultist spells, and then he finds a kind of occult guru that he follows, and then he eventually creates the monster, not from dead bodies, but through magic. And the monster breaks free, goes home, kills his brother. Sounding familiar to any of the movies to you guys? Yeah, I mean, there's elements in the Brana film that kind of parallel the novel, but you have to squint. And that's actually more painful than not having to squint and just having a different story told that was inspired by. So I just find it fascinating that, like, no one has given that iconic Frankenstein performance that Karloff gave. There's only, when you say Frankenstein, there's only one actor that's come into mind. So I think people have done well with it inside projects, but it would be hard pressed for me to believe anyone who believes that there's a performance they like more.
There isn't one better yet. No. At least not to this point. And there may never be.
There's a great, if you're a hardcore Karloff fan, there's a great clip you can find on YouTube of Vincent Price and Karloff on the Red Skeleton Show singing a song called Just the Two of Us, in which it ends with Karloff standing up, which was an incredibly difficult thing at that point in his life because he was basically confined to a wheelchair, rolling his arm across and giving the Frankenstein growl one last time on film. And it's an amazing clip. And again, if you're a Price fan, it doesn't hurt to hear Price sing either. Red Skeleton makes an ass of himself, but that's kind of the Red Skeleton thing.
Okay. I do have to look that up. I've seen that. Or did you have a favorite of the Frankensteins that you remember, or
I like the first one, then Bride, even though I'm not just saying this because Lawrence here. Bride is the better film. And then I also really like third would be Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein Monster. Yeah. I saw that one probably the most growing up just because it was on TV so much. Yeah. So
It was on
Lauren,
television a ton.
like
You are
every
right,
Saturday
Oregon.
and
That is
Sunday
the one that's
morning.
been on most.
Every Saturday and Sunday morning was
Oh,
like
yeah.
Three Stooges and cartoons.
Which it makes me
Lauren,
feel bad for saying I think that's probably my least favorite of the original run.
It's the one I've seen the least as an adult, anyway. I definitely, definitely saw it as a kid a number of times, but I don't know. There's a side of me that thinks that the monsters never should have been subjected to the comedy. By the same rate, if it gives
That's
joy to anyone out there, I'm not going to try and take that away
I
from
don't
them.
want to. Yeah, I don't want to. Rain on that parade because if you love it, that's fantastic. And it's also one if it's on, if that was the only thing to watch in an evening, and like say the family wants to watch it or a group of friends, I'm down.
And
Not against it.
of those Abbott and Costello Meets films, it's really the only one that actually feels like they're trying to live in the world of the Universal monsters as opposed to just make fun of the world. So it's definitely the best of the bunch. It's definitely the funniest of the bunch too because they're playing it mostly straight. But whatever.
Well,
And
one of the
Frankenstein's
best.
monster is number 2 for me on the monster list.
Me as well, I think. Or we might be in line in the same stuff. And to mention this again, well, I guess we'll mention it as we go on because it's actually more important to the next batch. And there was a couple of great posters of this, and I didn't know what to use. I had the official theatrical one up, but this one supposedly has sold, the original sheet has sold for the most money for a poster. Have you heard that too, Lauren?
Yeah. There was was it velvet backed and rolled that it's still kind of in rough shape, but yeah, that was that a Christie's auction like I don't know 6 or 7 years ago.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
That's what I read at least. So Dracula, this series we got, of course, the great Bela Lugosi. We'll get into how that changes. The sequel,
Which is
Dracula's
an amazing
daughter,
film.
5 years later,
Yep.
and then another what was it? 7 years later for the third one, Son of Dracula.
Oh yeah, Son of Dracula.
And then
Which, by the way, that title is so misleading. It's not funny.
it really is.
Spoilers. It's just Dracula.
It is, and I think this was the one I've watched most. No, it was House of Dracula I just watched, but I did watch Son of Dracula this past year too.
But look, Evelyn Ankers. Why don't we talk about Evelyn Ankers as a classic Universal star? Because she's in like half the classic films.
Well, ever since we first brought her up, yeah, her name keeps popping up, so why not? She's
hot.
as Kory said,
And
she's hot.
she was actually a good actress too. Like, and that's not Golden Age. That was not always a prerequisite, by the way. So, fair point. She deserved the roles.
Now, did she have a career outside of these monster movies?
Well, she was in other things, definitely, but
dramatic,
this was what she
anything
was known
big?
for. Even then,
And there's
she
nothing
was
wrong with that.
she was a scream
At
queen
all.
of her age, overshadowed by Fay Wray, as everyone was. Because let's face it, Fay Wray basically was one of the most perfect things to ever exist. But
Both fantastic.
yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we can't have both. Because what a world we live in when Evelyn Ankers and Fay Wray and Aquanetta all lived on the planet at a time. I'm just angry I wasn't alive for it. Yeah. Even a couple years later, Janet Leigh, I'd throw into that mix. The horror genre has been exceptionally lucky with its women.
It really has. And of course, in this series, as it's counted as, we go to the House of Frankenstein once again with the mashup.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Wolfman's in there. So background. So.
Good techno.
And then House of Dracula. And John Carradine basically took over this role. Lugosi only played it in the original, and then the Abbott and Costello one officially, right?
Yeah, although he made plenty of vampire. Well, he didn't make plenty. He made vampire films, which were obviously meant to play on his history with the character. But
he was playing Dracula basically, even if it was given another.
Right. I mean, he was in
three
the
other major movies outside of the Universal Studio.
Yeah, and I mean, he the remake of London After Midnight. He's in. I mean, there's a reason that he's playing the vampire.
Yeah, but can you think of a better person at that time to play that character or a vampire in general? I mean,
No, but the problem was, of course, that Lugosi was a really actually very good actor. His accent probably held him back to some degree in many roles, not in the role of a Carpathian, which is what he was. But it's sad because he's really good in a lot of things. And he'll always be remembered as Dracula, which is not a bad thing because obviously, like, most actors don't have a legacy that survives 10 years after their death, let alone, again, 90.
Well, I mean, and especially when you have this number of sequels and somebody else has played that character more than you, but yet you are still... I mean, he is the image of most people to Dracula to this day.
Is there a more sublime moment in film history than that slow creep up those stairs with those cobwebs as background? Dracula walks seemingly through a cobweb, which is something that no one ever talks about, is that because of the angle work and shadow work, they pulled off a special effect that no one even mentions. And that he disappears. We get that first shot of him in full, and he just says, "Welcome, I am Count Dracula." And it's a moment. It's a moment that is as strong as anything in film history. People talk about, like, the "Welcome to the Party" moment from Die Hard as a film classic moment. Well, that's not a shadow of that first introduction of Lugosi, right? People talk about any number of scenes from The Godfather. I love The Godfather, but it still doesn't have anything as iconic as that. So, yeah, Lugosi's that moment when horror's floodgates got kicked open. And rightly so, because, horror was thought of in the Nickelodeon days as kind of a cheap thing. You figured out a special effect that would scare people. You made a 6-minute loop. You were done. And here was something that resonated on a deeper level and filled up a feature length, which was a real concern. People didn't know if horror could be feature length and work. Just as we're talking today about people freaking out about Terrifier 2's running time, which, Terrifier 2 might be the wrong film for that length. I'm not saying that. I haven't seen it yet, but very seriously, like, there was a concern that horror was something that would only work in short doses and that it wouldn't sustain for a feature. Well, Dracula destroys that concept when it's the biggest hit of 1931. By far the biggest hit of 31. I mean, we might not have the horror genre on film as we know it without Lugosi's performance. That's not overstating it. That's probably true.
I don't think so.
Frankenstein would not have been a consideration. It was released the same year, but film production was very different back then. So,
And the whole vampire genre of horror, I is easily my favorite. Like, you get films like the Blade trilogy, Let the Right One In. I'll only name those two, because there's so many good ones. But I love those aspects. Like, it's completely kick-ass, but then there's a love aspect also with it. Same time, Dracula's a pimp,
Well, when Gary Oldman played him, it was literally a pimp. I mean, there's no way other way about it. I've crossed oceans of time.
I actually do enjoy that movie very much.
I want to love it, and I can't quite get there because it makes too many really bizarre choices.
It does.
But it's a beautiful film, mostly. The second unit stuff, it stands out so clearly in that movie, though. It's like the stuff that Coppola shot is like clearly Coppola, and the stuff that he didn't shoot is clearly not. But I do love all the like miniature train sets and all that, which does evoke the classic era really well. I love Oldman as the character. Some of the other casting, I don't know at all. But
You're not a big Keanu Reeves fan?
he's not even my biggest problem because he's in so little of the movie. I hate to say it, but Winona Ryder kind of sucks in that movie.
Do you
No one
guys
wants to say it out
remember-
loud because we all like her, but
Yeah.
not
Do
her
you guys
finest
remember
hour.
how big that movie was when it came out?
Mhm.
It
It
was
was
big. I was
everywhere.
11, and we gotta see that in a theater. We knew the manager was doing a play, and he opened it up for us like at midnight. My parents let me go, and it was a blast. But maybe we'll get to that if we cover modern Dracula. I guess, can you call that modern anymore? 30 years ago?
Isn't that crazy? I'm old
man.
as hell.
We're old.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
just
that's scary.
I was
think
3.
the whole Y2K thing's over 20 years ago. So
Yeah, but look at what you're talking about Dracula. Bela Lugosi played it officially twice, and that was 17 years apart. So it's really not that big of a
Well,
difference,
so
is it, guys?
the other thing we should probably mention about this is that Lugosi actually was not the first choice for the role, even though he'd played it on the New York stage, and was extremely, extremely well received in the role on the stage. But the thought was that film was not stage and that they should be kept separately. They should be kept separate. So they didn't really want to put the stage actor, even though the screenplay was based on the stage play, not on the novel directly. But they didn't really want Lugosi. They just ended up having to use him basically because he knew the part inside and out, and there was a certain expectation from part of the audience for him. But he's not the only one that played him either, because of course the George Melford version of the same film shot on the same sets. After Hours.
Was that the Spanish version?
Yep, and then you have Carlos Willanares, playing the role, and that version of the film. So Todd Browning made a really efficient film. If you can say nothing else about Dracula, so the sets were amazing, Lugosi is amazing, and it's really efficient. But the Melford film it's a little bit more relaxed. It has a little bit more atmosphere, but the lead's not as good. And ultimately, that's the big problem with the Spanish version, is that it gets everything else right, but you don't have Lugosi's like charisma.
And I have watched some of the Spanish version recently, and the shots. There's even some more beautiful shots in that version than there is the American one or the original.
Shot in the PM, different crew came in following the same, reportedly the same screenplay and even shot list, although it's hard to see that in the final product. A lot more camera motion, which is fascinating because people point out that camera motion was really rare at the time because there's no way to really record sound live and not have like the sound of moving equipment. That sounds bizarre today, I know, but nothing was handheld, I promise you. So a lot more motion, which again, Bride of Frankenstein in 35, which is 4 years later, gets a lot of credit for all those swooping shots. Of course, that was just James Whale saying, who needs to we can record sound later, we're fine. Again, early years of sound film. Who knows? But I find the Spanish version to be an interesting watch, but it's not as engaging without Lugosi, and that's the big problem I think it'll always have.
I totally agree.
And you don't speak Espanol?
I barely
doesn't
speak
bother
English,
Lorne.
sir.
Me as well. Touche.
Most of what I watch is subtitled, so at this point,
Speaking American, know what I'm saying? Freedom.
And Carradine, he did a fine job. Because he's a great actor, I think. No Lugosi as far as the character of Dracula. But
Yeah, I mean, Carradine is more accurate to the description in the novel of the character, because you do have the beard and the mustache, and you do have kind of the gaunt, tall, which is all not Lugosi. You know, like everything
Which
that
I
you
think
could.
Christopher Lee complained about once he was taken over with Hammer. He never liked Bella's performance as
No,
Dracula.
because it was historically so far from accurate. But the irony there is it was historically inaccurate, but yet the man's nationality was right.
Yeah.
The accent was dead on. But so Dracula is a weird role. I mean, it's been interpreted more than any other character in screen history. The character has been portrayed more than any other character. And yet there's such a variety of approaches to it. Some, like Oldman's character, is visually probably perfect for the novel. His accent, and I love Oldman, he's one of my favorite actors of all time. His accent is somewhat of an exaggeration.
Yeah, definitely.
But the whole movie's an exaggeration. So that's kind of acceptable. Langella, I think, is really very good. But it's a very different take on the character. I don't know. I think it's one of those evergreen characters that you can do 70,000 times in different ways and you'll be fine. But
you can, but I want Universal to go back to that, just the essence of the classic look. This isn't even really classic. This is an 80s mask. One of those old that's getting brittle.
The scary thing, I think, is that, and I decry this, is that you couldn't do Lugosi's Dracula today and have people take it seriously. Because there's been too many years of parody and just...
There has, but it's been so many years since we've even had the parodies that look like this the Lugosi Dracula, which is the definitive Dracula look, I think. We haven't had that in a while in a big movie, and that's what I was saying about the Universal trying to reboot this stuff and not respecting it, at least the essence of that.
Well, I'm skeptical of remakes always, but so the most recent word I've had about what might be going on with The Bride of Frankenstein actually gave me some hope.
Really?
A director who's had a lot of success this year in the genre, maybe more success than anyone else in the genre this year, is in talks right now, and that's a pretty exciting moment. Now, on the other side of the coin, the studio that'll be making the film does not excite me at all, but that's okay. Because it won't be made in-house at Universal. It'll be farmed out. And Big Crack Rock is mentioning Dwight Fry, which eventually we should have mentioned. Like, Dwight Fry is the unsung hero of all Universal. And unfortunately, the man has alcoholism and the fact that he came from, a history of mental illness in his family. It was never going to end well, and it didn't end well for him personally. But his Renfield. I love Tom Waits in the Coppola film. That might be my favorite thing about the Coppola film. But Jesus, Dwight Fry, it doesn't get better. His performance in this, in Dracula, and in Frankenstein, and in Bride of Frankenstein, where he plays a different character, although it's kind of the same character. Man, Dwight Fry. We shouldn't be mentioning Karloff and Lugosi without his name ever, to be honest with you. But unfortunately, tragedy prevented him from ever having much longevity, and that's sad. So yeah, Big Crack Rock, great call out. It's like the wonderful thing about, like, when we talk about these names of these actors, can you think of another genre, like the great Westerns of the 40s, which was the most popular genre in the 1940s? Like, name actors from them. Go.
Gene Autry.
Cool.
Can you name over 5, I guess? Because I couldn't.
I don't even know if Gene Autry was actually in the 40s.
I believe you're right, though. I believe Gene Autry would have been in like mid to late 40s as the start of the career. But my point is just that, like, if you know classic horror at all, it doesn't take you a moment to start spitting out names. And that's simply not true for most genres of this vintage. So that's a thing. Like the genre, especially classic monster movies, they're respected, don't get me wrong, but they're probably foundational to film at this point, period. Even something like Laurie's performance in M, which is definitely part of the genre, by the way. I don't see where we get any psycho thrillers that came after it without that movie existing, period, you know? So, I mean, I don't want to downplay, it's not just Universal, because I think 20th Century Fox was doing some great work. All the Poverty Row, Monogram, for instance, productions at the time really do hold up way better than they should. There was something just magical in those early days of cinema about this particular genre. Even the trash like Maniac, I'm talking about the 34 film, not Lustig's film. It's incredibly fun to watch to this day. But I can't say that about all of like the stuff that came out in the 50s, for instance, or 60s, or definitely the 70s. And I think the 70s is the second best genre, decade of the genre. But the 30s, there was just magic in the air. Also worth mentioning, nothing happened in the genre in America or in Britain for over a full year because horror was banned. So
What year was that?
36 to 37. And
Thanks, Hitler, you piece of shit.
I wish it was
The
that
code?
simple. Yeah. The code basically, the Breen code just basically like crippled the genre, and then church groups were pressuring the studios, and it was a really dark time. But that happened, and yet still the genre persisted. And the strength of these monster movies, the fact that they were classics, even in their time, it was understood that these films would endure, allowed this genre to come back like a monster from the dead and be with us to this day. And that's not certain. There are genres that have disappeared. There are types of films that are no longer made. The melodrama is pretty much dead. You know, even something like the Western, you get a few of every year, but it went from being the most popular genre of action to what do you get theatrically? One Western a year? Maybe. You're muted, Jess.
I was gonna say if even one a year.
And sometimes, you know, people get shot on the sets and then those films get made anyway. So I don't know. Just want to be topical so in 5 years this video won't make any sense to anyone. But yeah, so I mean, I think that when we talk about when we talk about the horror genre, it's easy to say that like better things happened later, or I relate to 70s and 80s horror more, or whatever you want to say. It's fine, but I can't think of another batch of films that have endured as well, consistently found a new audience, remained relevant. We were walking last time I was at a horror convention, we were walking around and I said to a friend, like, you know what's weird? I don't see any Witch or Hereditary merchandise on any of these tables. Modern classics, but I don't see t-shirts, I don't see action figures, I don't see anything. I see a bunch of 80s stuff. And I see a bunch of 70s stuff. And I see a ton of 1930s stuff. The genre was born out of the backlot. These were not meant to be the big films of the year, but yet they were just good enough, and people responded to them. We have the genre we have today simply because these films are as good as they are, and that gets put on, to me, some great writing, some great directors, some amazing performances. All the elements of film were in place for these movies like no other time for a single genre, a single field of filmmaking. It's kind of the most remarkable thing about the genre is that we had this growth spurt between 1931 and 42. before it turned into parody. Just amazing.
Isn't it funny though that even in like the Universal cycle, even that turned into parody as it did in the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah. Well, you know, people always say that like Freddy, Michael, Jason, Leatherface, they're the universal monsters of our era, and I actually disagree with that concept. So like those great tragic monster characters that Universal created have endured for 90 years. Maybe Michael, Jason, Freddy, Leatherface are those characters for today. I don't think we know. I don't think we know at all. I mean, already, you know, it's been a long time since there's been a Freddy movie. We don't know where the fandom really lies. If a film came out tomorrow, would it be big? We know that the remake faded off pretty damn fast, and that's true that's true of Friday the 13th as well, right? Like that sequel opened big, and then it lost 70% of its audience in its second weekend. So we don't know. We all want to believe one or two things about it, but we can't, you know, hope or wishing is not a strategy, just the same way as it doesn't provide any clarity. We know that Lugosi's Dracula and Karloff's Frankenstein will endure long after we're gone. That's a certainty.
Well, we've got another 40, 50 years to see with the other ones, so I'll
Yeah,
tell you then.
and that's fine. They may very well be. I just think it's premature to call them that.
Fair enough, fair enough. But I tell you, they're the front runners. If there
Right
is
now.
if there is a batch of characters.
Yeah, I mean,
Now,
right
and
now.
that's not saying that they're like them at all.
Yeah.
The characters themselves are like each other.
It's
They
just
are
hard
our
for me
monsters.
because sure, but I think of a certain age, your Norman Bates is probably should be in that running as well, because I think the Psycho story will be told many, many more times in our lifetime and beyond as well. So, but I don't know that anything will ever top the staggering importance of, again, the Frankenstein monster, Dracula, even the Wolfman. I'll throw Chaney that bone. I don't think it's because of his performance. I think it's the amazing makeup. But
And what's her tush?
Evelyn Anchors?
Yes. I will remember that name at one point. Oh, Chris, I don't know about that.
I do. I mean, for me, it's true.
I don't really get the obsession with Freddy.
If
I
you're
don't really understand.
Well, this is
I-
Fetty, not Freddy. So
Oh,
maybe
Freddy.
it's
Fetty.
it's Fetty scent.
The Fetty doll. Yeah, no, that is not true.
I'm so tired.
I read it. I read it
Freddy.
as Freddy 2 orc. So
I was like, what?
To me, it's not even very easy to make that distinction, because if you talk about Lugosi's Dracula, I definitely disagree. But
Freddy.
Fetty Cougar.
It's hard
but
to
it,
compare.
Nice
in that
one,
sense.
Chris.
For me personally, it's Freddy, not Fetty, but it is definitely arguable that that statement wouldn't be true. I mean,
I think
Dracula.
there's some comparisons that could be drawn, similarities between the characters. The fact that Freddy speaks, so does Dracula. They
If you're
both
matching it
have
up in that
iconic
sense.
lines and stuff in their movies, but I can't say. And I'm a big Freddy guy, but I can't say he's better than Dracula. I can say
No.
that I think he's equal to, but not better than.
We have another question.
I think it's a vastly different thing. But as far as endurance, it's going to take time to find out. I mean, we're going to see the 100th anniversary of these movies before long. Think about that for a moment. I mean,
I have been this whole show just going, this is amazing. We're at
your great grandparents were the ones that went to go see these movies, probably. So Yeah, I mean that shouldn't be undervalued. Now maybe year 3000. God, that doesn't sound like a real thing, but in the year 3000, maybe Freddy Krueger is still going to be remembered and revered, and maybe we'll be on the 18th actor to play him or 80th actor to play him or whatever. But we know Dracula's still going strong at this point, so we'll see.
Dracula, I don't think is going away either in
No.
100 years,
No.
80 years. And yeah, I hope Freddy's right there with him, that at least the character's known. I don't need to see him play. I need to be dead before I see him played anymore by anybody else. But
Well, I think you're going to get one more kind of almost Robert Englund performance as Freddy.
And there's a huge part of me that wants that, Lorne, but then there's also a big part of me that, honestly, at this point, I am kind of almost like, maybe we should just leave it.
So
I've got my original series bookend just fine, and if they do something else, they could potentially sour that a little bit.
I mean, the way the new printed silicone masks that are out there, he wouldn't have to undergo makeup at all. He could literally roll it on and they'd fix the digital edges.
Yeah.
It's about, at this point, I think it's about payday and his the agreement that he's doing the close-ups and that body doubles are going to fill in all the action-y shots. But I think it's going to happen. I would bet money on it happening. But how long can we keep that rolling? I mean, I think you get one more shot at that, and then the legacy has to figure itself out.
Well, I think a lot of the stuff that we all are holding on to, that you're lucky if you have one more shot with the original actors or characters, and then it is time to move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people always say, well, you can't replace Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it would be a different thing, and you should not write the role for Robert Englund ever again. You should write it for whoever you're going to have play him, which is the main problem I see with recasting it. But I mean, I think that just potentially as big a problem as recasting Jigsaw in Saw, right? Tobin Bell is that character pretty much. He is the voice. You can have other killers in that franchise show up, and you have, but that's also the problem with these characters. Like even Frankenstein, there's a big change, and it's a step down once it's no longer Karloff. Not to say that the guys that came later didn't do an amazing job. They did, but
that's always been a frustration for, well, at least fans, that when the actors don't come back to the roles that you made them love in a way, you played. And I'm honestly fine with that, Lorne, as far as somebody else playing, say, Freddy, as much as I love it. And I'm one who has said nobody else can play Freddy but Robert Englund. And I do still mean that, too. As long as Robert Englund can act and play that role, even in close-ups, I don't need to see another Freddy. Now, the next generation, to keep that character living on, sure. There is a time to recast. I've accepted multiple Draculas. I think Christopher Lee's Dracula is great.
Mm-hmm.
Just not yet.
Well, you're just not quite ready for it yet.
Just not yet, yeah.
Well, the thing is, at this point, I don't know if you saw the news that Bruce Willis has sold his likeness to an investment company that they can license out his, basically, so the deepfakes can. You will see a Bruce Willis action film that Bruce Willis never stepped on the set. That's going to happen within the next year. That might be part of the future for all these characters. At a certain point, I do think we will get to the point where actors are not a thing in movies. I mean, I hate saying it out loud, but if you thought the studios could get away with having an action star that never ages, or a lead actress that never ages, that's like the current incarnation of what most people consider beauty. You think they're going to not do that? They're going to do it. It's going to happen. So I don't know what Freddy. I don't know the Freddys and the Jasons and the Leather. I don't know what that future looks like. All I can say is I keep hoping for new icons where we don't have to have these conversations. But my suspicion is that that's going to be slow coming. So
We had a question. It was about, I think, a box set of all of them. Didn't we talk about that? Hasn't there been?
Yeah. Or don't you have that? Isn't that what you were
No, that's
what you were
not what
holding up?
he
No,
has.
it's a DVD set and it has a shit ton of movies on it.
But I think
there's
there is a universal set with pretty much.
that collects all the legacy box into
Yeah.
one box. So it's the characters we discussed tonight, all their films. Well, at least the Universal films. But that's not even half of the movies that exist inside the proper Universal Monster franchise. So will we get something that has everything? I don't know. There's not. Listen, the two things: there's not enough time in physical media for that. Second of all, what would that box cost for 42 movies? I mean,
You're wanting them done like they do the box sets, like you want your more modern movies to be. Yeah, that's
If you know the right people,
impossible.
nothing.
yeah, I mean, I'm not paying $800 for a box set
Yeah.
of anything, so I just don't see it. But listen, go out there, explore the movies. They're available. All of them have been preserved pretty beautifully at this point. Go check out the movies and then go pick up the ones that you love while physical media is still an option for you. I mean, again, it's weird for me to be pimping the Scream Factory as much as I did tonight, but those collections for all the non-iconic characters, they're awesome. I have nitpicks, but they're awesome. And they've ensured the movies are going to survive in the digital age for a long time now because, I mean, yeah, 6K televisions are probably right around the corner, but I don't care. Do you? So at this point, I'm good. These films are going to live.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, unless any of you have any closing statements on these monsters, do you want to go around the room?
Well, there was a couple of things I wanted to kind of point out that I think we kind of missed. I think it was the Mummy. The first Mummy was the first one of the Universal Monster movies that wasn't based off of a previous property.
Mhm.
The Frankenstein and Dracula were books. What was the other one?
The Invisible Man.
This is Man's as Wells.
Yeah, but I believe the Mummy was the first one that was a completely new.
Oh, you mean the
story.
The other new ones that weren't? Well, I think the Wolfman himself. I mean, werewolves have been around, and then
Yeah, but the Mummy came out before the Wolfman.
But the Mummy came out before both of those. Yes.
Well, I mean, so yeah, you're right. I'm trying to remember the exact title here. So Bram Stoker had a novel called It's a Mummy novel. And I think there was an attempt at one point to try and secure the rights to it. And that was going to be the basis of their Mummy movie. But then the widow was gun shy about Hollywood to begin with. For whatever reason, it didn't quite happen. And they realized that all the news stories coming out of Egypt about all the archaeological digs were huge news. The curse stories were actually in legitimate newspapers. Like the question of whether there was a curse on these grave sites was very legitimate at the time. It was very topical. It was very popular at the time. So a lot of things went into it. But yeah, you're right. There's not a clear literary source. And the same thing's true of Wolfman a few years later. But
the second thing I wanted to bring up was I wanted to ask Lorne, how heartbroken were you that Bride didn't win that S'mores and Doors tournament?
I knew it wasn't going to happen. I had actually predicted that Chainsaw was going to win that thing before we began. So here's my disappointment here, and it's partially unfair. You can't compare a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre to The Bride of Frankenstein. It's an impossibility, and that's the beauty of our genre, right?
Agreed.
That I can have that kind of width and breadth. But just to be fair, one film is 83% 3 years old. Does that math right?
Sounds
and-
close.
And got a 4K treatment first. So I mean, I love Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I understand why it won, given the panel, right? But my question is, if we had people of a different vintage, people older than me, by the way, like I'm too young to have this opinion still, but if we were to have the same conversation in 1985 with the top film critics of the time, this wouldn't have even been a question, right? I mean, Bride is recognized as one of the greatest film achievements, not just the horror genre, just in general, by a large swath of entertainment professionals, reviewers, people in the industry. I'm not a John Landis fan. Everyone knows that, but he name checks the film constantly as a favorite. I think Joe Dante is a huge favorite. Steven Spielberg is a huge proponent of it. And Chainsaw has definitely a huge reputation too, but it wasn't disappointment as much as resignation, but I decided just to have fun in the chat. I was glad it lasted as long as it did, frankly. But I mean, listen, the only place that I get weirded out is when people have like opinions like the Leprechaun films honestly beating out anything. I get that you think they're dumb fun and you have a lot of fun with them, but if you're talking about best films,
they're dumb fun. No way.
Yeah,
in any top.
There's
Get weirded out.
Because I think there's a very real chance inside the community of like saying which do you like more, Leprechaun or Silence of the Lambs, and people will go, well, Leprechaun, and my head just explodes.
No.
My head just explodes.
But that's the thing I can see happening, like easily happening. By the way,
That's kind of sad. Yeah,
but that's okay. I wonder too, because like I wasn't always of the same opinion. Like I've always loved monster movies, but when I was a younger man, when I was 18 years old, I was way more fixated on the gore films of Italy, and that I would have said that those were preferable. But as I've aged, like one group of films has shown their strength and another kind of has shown their weaknesses. I think that's my journey. That doesn't mean it'll happen to everyone. I'm not making some proclamation of like, you kids, but definitely I think there's a percentage of people who will eventually kind of like start to appreciate older stuff and not get caught up on whether it's in color or black and white or whether it's in English. I think eventually there'll be more appreciation. It won't necessarily change people's minds, but there'll be more appreciation.
I hope so. I promise we are two different people.
The jackets would told me that.
Yes.
Funny thing is that when Jess and I were in high school, they had an 80s themed dance, and I've always been stuck in the 80s. So I was the guy in high school in the late 90s wearing a Skid Row shirt, ripped jeans, and a leather jacket. And
Too soon.
What do you mean too soon?
Just carry on.
Anyway, so they offered like $2 off your ticket into this dance if you dress like you're from the 80s. So I'm wearing ripped jeans and a leather jacket. Jess has nothing that says 80s. So he asks if he can borrow my jacket. I'm like, sure. So I loan him my jacket. He walks in, $2 off. I go to pay, and they tell me that I have to pay full price. I'm like, I'm wearing ripped jeans, tight ripped jeans. No, I still had to pay full price. So this fucker got my $2 off.
I don't remember that, but
you don't remember that?
Sounds like something
80s themed dance.
Happened. I kind of remember that, but
we had 80s themed dances when I was in grade school and first couple years of high school. But then again, it was the 80s,
1980s, wasn't it?
And I didn't go to those dances, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Just a funny story. Jess
What's coming up
Jess
on
is
your-
always costing me money, so
Your channel, Lorne.
What about my channel?
What's coming up on it?
So funny about that. So I'm still working on the long form Cronenberg video. It might be a monster video. I'm kind of afraid because I've recorded way too much for it, and I'm not even close to done. So I have to figure out how to get that beast under control. That monster in a box needs to be more in the box than not. So that's the next big thing that's coming. But I at the moment I'm balls deep in editing the new book with my editor Miriam over at Fractured Mirror. So that's been eating up a lot of my time, which is a good thing because the big thing is that book will Divide by Zero will be out this year. We're going to make the fiscal year. Well, not the fiscal year, but the calendar year. But it has had an effect on the channel, clearly, because I only have so many hours in the day to work a day job, to do the work on the book that the editor wants me to, and little things like sleep and eat, occasionally breathe. So that's happening. My plan is November, once we get past the work on the book, whether the book is coming out in November or not. The intention is to get back to getting another obscurity report running, and maybe some of the long churning guests will show up. I don't know.
Okay, look forward to it. And maybe you'll get the dual crew, unless you've canceled that show, to finally watch for the next episode.
Well, they have to watch the movies. That's the question, right?
I'm included in that, so yes. Well, I look
Jamie-
forward to it.
Jamie Ork is always trying to tickle Jess's nipples.
It's what he does. And Orc, speaking of, Orc 145626, he's got some new videos. Kind of regular.
What up, homie?
Homie.
So first thing, follow Sam at SheebyGeebies on Instagram,
Not Twitter.
or Instagay as I like to call it, the Zuck path of way. So yeah, buy some books. Go to Amazon, type in Lorne Dixon. They make you educated and smart like myself. An attractive, strapping young lad like the band.
Oh, the band. City
Yeah.
is a great album.
And watch more Horror Rumble because it's like one of the best channels on YouTube.
Oh,
And then tell Dan he shouldn't have skipped out on the show because we needed him. So yeah.
he did apologize. He's doing like 20 shows a day over on Flesh Wound
He
Features.
can do more.
He would just come in here and beat me up again. So it's fine.
Honestly, you may have him on this classic horror, Lorne. If it were straight up this trivia.
I don't know.
I don't know. Off the Grill, yes, check out Off the Grill.
I don't know if you should check out Off the Grill.
And I don't know about Endurance Productions either, but
I know Endurance
you made it just in
Productions.
time to say goodbye.
Yeah, subscribe to Endurance Productions. He's an OG Sausage Factory guy.
Oh, okay. Oh, is that
B Junior.
Eric E?
That's B West.
And I'm kidding, Steak. I love you. Fucker.
Steak.
Steak sauce.
If you want me to
Steak.
fire him, I will, Sauce. And Kory,
It would only be the, sixth time this season you fired me?
sixth. I fired you 6 times on the last episode, didn't I?
Okay, seventh time. Whatever.
Oh. Wait a minute. Crack Rock, what are you saying? Well, if they owe you the books.
That's
Amazon.
a confusing thing to me.
I haven't had any problem. I got 3 of Lorne's books that were purchased, and then, 4. I got a gift. But,
I appreciate any eyes that anyone puts on my books. I appreciate it.
I've got 2. I've read one. Still got to read the other one.
And I definitely appreciate it.
I appreciate it. It's enjoyable, or I would have only bought one. So there we go.
That's friendship right there.
The friendship was just buying the one.
Oh.
I bought more because I liked your work. All right. Well, we've got another Horror Rumble, I'm sure, coming up next month.
Yeah, well, and on that note, I mean, I don't really know how to read, so Lorne said, if I bought some of his books, he would send me some Domino's pizza, and he did. So, that's
You
how it
did,
worked out.
and you bought his books.
Yeah.
It was kind of a little disappointing they didn't ask me to send him like legit Jersey pizza, but whatever.
Yeah. I don't
You got a
want to
bone to
get
pick
cold.
with Stingray too. He did drop by though in the chat. He was supposed to come on and fart during the show or something.
Apparently, he promised us fart noises. He never showed up.
No. Maybe next time. I'm going to give it away. I think the plan, I don't know if Lorne will want to be a part of this, is to do the Child's Place franchise next month, Chucky.
Now, see, Lauren, the great thing about this show is if you don't like the movies, we want you on.
Well, that's true too. It is supposed to be a rumble in our,
Well, we will. We'll see what my schedule looks like. Hopefully, things will have been calmed down by then.
That's why
But-
I'm hoping for November. October's
Yeah.
insane. That's why we're doing this show pretty early in October, just to make sure we get one in.
That's what she said.
Wait. When did she say that?
I don't know.
Good night.